Hey friends, welcome to the Horror Sleep. Almost 90% of you watching aren't subscribed. If you enjoy these true park ranger horror stories, hit that subscribe button and leave a like. It really helps the channel. Oh, and where are you watching from tonight? Let me know in the comments. I need you to understand something before I tell you this story. I'm not the kind of person who believes in ghost stories or supernatural nonsense. I've spent the last 11 years as a ranger at Olympic National Park in Washington State, and in that time, I've seen just about everything the wilderness can throw at you. Broken bones, hypothermia, bear encounters, people who thought they could hike the Hoh River Trail in flip-flops. I've pulled bodies out of ravines and talked panicked hikers down from ledges. The forest doesn't scare me, it never has. But what happened in October of 2019 changed something fundamental in the way I see the place I've dedicated my career to protecting. And I'm not alone. My partner that week, a ranger named Marcus, left the service 6 months after it happened. He works at a sporting goods store now, somewhere inland. He won't talk about it. Won't even take my calls. I still work here. I still walk those same trails, but there are sections of the park I avoid now, places where the fog rolls in thick and the trees seem to press in closer than they should. And when I'm out there alone, when the light starts to fade and the mist creeps up from the valley floor, I think about Megan Hartley, I think about her footprints, and I think about what we found, or more accurately, what we didn't find. It started on a Tuesday morning in mid-October. The summer crowds had thinned out, and we were in that quiet period between the peak season and the first real winter storms. The kind of time when you mostly deal with locals and serious hikers, people who know what they're doing out there. That's what made the missing person report so strange. The call came in around 9 in the morning. I was at the ranger station filling out paperwork, which is about 70% of this job if we're being honest, when dispatch radioed about a concerned roommate. A woman named Megan Hartley, 29 years old, had gone out for a solo overnight hike on Sunday. She was supposed to be back Monday evening. She never showed up. Her roommate, a guy named Devin, had driven up to the trailhead that morning and found Megan's car still parked there. That's when he called us. Now, in most cases like this, the hiker just decided to stay out an extra night or took a wrong turn and camped somewhere unexpected. They usually wander back looking sheepish and dehydrated within 24 hours. But something about this one felt off from the start. Marcus and I geared up and headed out to the Graves Creek trailhead, where Megan's car was parked. It was a gray morning, the kind where the clouds hang so low you feel like you could reach up and touch them. The air was thick with moisture. Not quite rain, but not quite mist either. Just that constant dampness that soaks into everything out here. Devin was waiting for us when we arrived, pacing next to a blue Honda Civic. He was maybe 30, thin, wearing an expensive rain jacket that looked like it had never seen actual weather. The kind of guy who moves to the Pacific Northwest for the aesthetic but stays indoors when it's actually raining. "Thank God," he said when he saw us. "I've been here since 7. Her car's been here since Sunday. She always texts me when she gets back. Always." I asked him to tell us about Megan's hiking experience, what gear she had, what her plan was. You'd be surprised how many people go into the Olympic wilderness completely unprepared. But Devin assured us Megan knew what she was doing. She'd been hiking these trails for 3 years, ever since moving to Port Angeles. She had all the right gear. She'd filed a trip plan with him, even though she hadn't filed one with us, which honestly most day hikers don't. Her plan was simple. Hike up to the Six Ridge Trail, about 12 miles in, camp overnight at one of the established sites, then hike back out Monday. Total loop of maybe 25 miles. Nothing crazy for someone in decent shape. The weather had been clear on Sunday. No storms forecast. No reason for concern. Except she wasn't back. Marcus and I exchanged a look. We'd both done enough of these searches to know that when an experienced hiker with proper gear goes missing on a clear day on a well-marked trail, it usually means one of two things: medical emergency or accident. A fall, a twisted ankle that got infected, a heart condition nobody knew about. We needed to move fast. We called it in, got a search team assembled, and started up the trail around 10:30. Marcus and I took point while two other rangers, Sarah and Jim, started from a different access point to cover more ground. The plan was to hike the route Megan had intended, checking all the established campsites and keeping our eyes open for any sign of her. The trail starts out easy, winding through old-growth forest with those massive Sitka spruces towering overhead. The ground was soft with moss and fallen needles, and everything had that rich, earthy smell that only comes from a temperate rainforest. Under normal circumstances, it's beautiful, peaceful. But that day, with the fog starting to roll in from the valley, it felt different. Oppressive, maybe. Like the forest was holding its breath. We made good time for the first few hours, calling out Megan's name every few minutes and stopping to check for any signs of her. Boot prints, disturbed vegetation, anything. The trail was muddy in places and we could see tracks from other hikers, but nothing that definitively looked like it came from a solo woman in the last 48 hours. Around 1 in the afternoon, we reached the first of the established campsites where Megan might have stayed. It was empty. No tent, no fire ring that had been used recently, no trash or gear left behind. We checked the surrounding area anyway, walking in widening circles, but there was nothing. Maybe she pushed on to the next site, Marcus said, but I could hear the doubt creeping into his voice. If Megan was an experienced hiker, she would have known to stop at the first good campsite rather than risk hiking in the dark. We kept going. The fog was getting thicker now, rolling through the trees in dense waves. Visibility dropped to maybe 30 feet. The temperature was falling too, and I could see my breath when I exhaled. We switched on our headlamps even though it was only mid-afternoon. The beams of light looked solid in the mist, like you could reach out and touch them. That's when Marcus spotted something. "Hey, over here." I turned and saw him kneeling next to the trail, examining something in the mud. I jogged over and looked down. There, clear as day, was a boot print. It was the right size for a woman's hiking boot, deep enough to suggest someone carrying a full pack, and it looked recent. The edges were still sharp, not eroded by rain. "Could be her," I said. "Let's mark it." We dropped a small orange flag next to the print and kept moving. Over the next half mile, we found 3 more prints, all heading in the same direction as us, all looking fresh. The fog was so thick now that we could barely see more than 20 feet ahead. Our calls for Megan seemed to die in the air, swallowed by the mist. Then the prints stopped. I don't mean they got washed away or covered by leaves. I mean they just ended. One clear boot print in the mud, and then nothing. The trail continued ahead, just as muddy, just as soft, but there were no more tracks. It was like she'd been walking along and then simply lifted off the ground. Marcus and I stood there staring at the last print for a long moment. "She must have stepped onto rocks or something," Marcus said, but his voice was uncertain. We looked around. There were no rocks. The trail here was pure mud and soft earth, the kind that shows every footfall. "Let's keep going," I said. "Maybe she went off trail." We spent the next hour searching in widening circles from that last print, looking for any sign of where Megan might have gone. The fog was so dense now that Marcus and I had to stay within visual range of each other or risk getting separated. The forest felt wrong. Too quiet. I kept expecting to hear birds or wind in the trees, but there was nothing. Just our footsteps and our breathing and the occasional drip of water from the branches overhead. We found nothing. No prints, No broken branches, no disturbance of any kind. It was like she'd walked to that exact spot and vanished. By 4 in the afternoon, it was getting dark. The fog and the cloud cover turned the forest into a twilight realm where our headlamps were almost useless. We decided to push on to the next campsite, hoping maybe Megan had somehow gotten ahead of us or taken a different route we'd missed. That's where we found her tent. It was set up in a small clearing about 50 yards off the main trail, in a spot that wasn't an official campsite. The tent was a good one, expensive, properly staked and guyed out. The rain fly was on tight. Everything looked normal. Orderly, like someone had set it up carefully and deliberately. "Megan," I called out. No answer. Marcus and I approached slowly. I don't know why we were being cautious. Maybe it was the fog, or the way the light was failing, or just that feeling you get when something's not right. I knelt down and unzipped the tent fly. The smell hit me first. Not a bad smell, just dry. Stale air, like the tent had been closed up for days. I shone my light inside. The tent was empty. Sleeping bag rolled up neatly at one end. A small backpack in the corner, a water bottle, a headlamp hanging from the ceiling loop. Everything you'd expect to see in a hiker's tent, except the hiker. Here's the thing that bothered me immediately. The inside of the tent was completely dry. Bone dry. The sleeping bag, the floor, everything. But when I ran my hand across the outside of the tent, it was soaked. Not just damp from the fog, but actually wet, like it had been raining hard. But it hadn't rained, we would have known. We'd been out here all day. "Marcus," I said quietly, "look at this." He came over and I showed him. The dry interior, the soaked exterior. He frowned, touching the fabric himself. "That's weird," he said. "Yeah." I backed out of the tent and stood up, shining my light around the clearing. That's when I noticed the footprints. They led from the tent to the edge of the clearing, heading back toward the main trail. But they were wrong. They were too shallow, almost like impressions rather than actual prints. And they were perfectly spaced, like someone walking very deliberately, very carefully. But here's what really got me. They ended at the edge of the clearing. Just like the prints on the trail. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps from the tent, and then nothing. The soft ground continued, perfect for holding prints, but there was nothing there. Marcus saw them too. I watched his face go pale in the beam of my headlamp. "What the hell?" he whispered. We searched the entire clearing, every inch of it. We looked for signs of a struggle, for blood, for disturbed earth, for anything that might explain where Megan had gone. There was nothing, just the tent. Perfectly set up, dry inside and wet outside, and 3 footprints that went nowhere. I radioed it in, told a dispatch we'd found Megan's tent but no sign of her. Described the situation as best I could, though I left out the part about the prints ending. I didn't know how to explain that without sounding crazy. Dispatch said they'd send more rangers at first light and asked if we wanted to return to the station. Marcus and I looked at each other. Neither of us wanted to admit it, but we both wanted out of those woods. The fog had turned the forest into something alien and hostile. Every shadow looked wrong. Every sound seemed too close or too far away. But we couldn't leave. Not with Megan still missing. So we set up camp about 100 yards from her tent. Close enough to watch over it, but far enough that we didn't have to stare at those impossible footprints all night. We didn't sleep much. How could we? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those prints. 1, 2, 3 steps, and then nothing. No explanation. No tracks leading away. Just an empty tent and the fog pressing in from all sides. Around midnight, I heard Marcus get up. I opened my eyes and saw him standing outside our tent, His headlamp pointed toward where Megan's tent was. "You okay?" I asked. "I thought I heard something," he said. His voice was tight, controlled, like footsteps in the mud. I listened. The forest was dead silent. Not even the usual night sounds. No owls, no rustling, nothing. "I don't hear anything," I said. "I know," Marcus said. "Neither do I, not anymore." He got back in the tent, but I could tell he wasn't going to sleep. Neither was I. We just lay there in our sleeping bags, listening to nothing, waiting for dawn. When the first gray light started filtering through the fog, I got up and walked over to Megan's tent. I don't know what I expected to find. Maybe I thought she'd come back during the night, that there'd be some logical explanation for everything. The tent looked exactly the same. Still perfectly set up. Still dry inside and wet outside. And those 3 footprints leading away from it, ending at the edge of the clearing. But there was something new. Something I hadn't seen the night before. Or maybe it had been too dark to notice. On the ground, right where the last footprint ended, someone had placed a small cairn. 3 rocks stacked on top of each other, perfectly balanced. I know it hadn't been there when we searched the clearing. I'd been over every inch of that ground. I called Marcus over. He stared at the cairn, then looked at me. "Did you—" he started. "No," I said. "Did you?" He shook his head. We both knew what this meant. Someone else had been in this clearing during the night, while we were camped just 100 yards away, while Marcus was hearing footsteps in the mud. Someone had walked into the clearing, stacked 3 rocks, and left, without making a sound, without leaving any tracks. I reached down to knock over the cairn, but Marcus grabbed my wrist. "Don't," he said. "Just don't." I pulled my hand back. He was right. Something about disturbing those rocks felt wrong. Dangerous even, though I couldn't have told you why. The other rangers arrived around 8 in the morning. Sarah, Jim, and 2 more I didn't know well. They brought dogs, which was a relief. If Megan was out here somewhere, injured or lost, the dogs would find her. We showed them the tent, explained what we'd found. I told them about the footprints ending, about the dry interior and wet exterior, about the cairn that had appeared overnight. I could see the skepticism in their faces. They thought we were spooked, imagining things. Maybe we'd just missed the tracks in the fog. But then the dogs got to the tent. Both of them started whining the second they got close. The handlers urged them forward, trying to get them to pick up a scent, but the dogs wouldn't go near it. They pulled on their leashes, trying to back away, making these low, distressed sounds I'd never heard from search dogs before. "That's weird," one of the handlers said. "They've never done that before." They tried for another 10 minutes, but the dogs wouldn't cooperate. Eventually, they gave up and decided to start searching the surrounding area without starting at the tent. The 7 of us spread out in a line and began combing through the forest. The fog had lifted slightly with the morning light, but visibility was still poor. We called out Megan's name every few minutes. The dogs ranged ahead of us, sniffing the ground, but they never alerted to anything. We searched all day, covered maybe 10 square miles of terrain. Found nothing. No tracks, no gear, no sign that Megan had ever been anywhere except that one clearing with her tent. As the afternoon wore on, Sarah and I ended up paired together, sweeping a section of forest about a mile from the tent. The trees here were old, massive, their trunks wider than cars. The ground was carpeted with moss and ferns, and everything had that muffled quality that old-growth forests have, like the trees absorb all sound. "What do you really think happened?" Sarah asked me. I didn't answer right away. I was trying to figure out how to say what I was thinking without sounding insane. "I think something's wrong with this place," I finally said. "With this section of the park, I think there's something here that isn't." I trailed off. Sarah was looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Isn't what?" she prompted. "Natural," I said. "I think there's something here that isn't natural." Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Jim told me something yesterday, before we came out here. He said there have been 3 other disappearances in this area over the last 5 years, all solo hikers, all experienced. None of them were ever found." My blood went cold. 3? 3, she confirmed. Park Service doesn't advertise it. Bad for tourism. But Jim's been here longer than any of us. He remembers. He said after the second one, they tried to close this section of trail, but the superintendent overruled it. Not enough evidence of actual danger. "Jesus," I said. We kept searching, but my mind was reeling. 3 disappearances, and now Megan made 4. All in the same area. All experienced hikers. What were the odds? We regrouped at the tent as it started to get dark again. Nobody had found anything. The dogs had been useless. It was like Megan had simply ceased to exist the moment she left her tent. The team leader, a guy named Rodriguez who'd driven in from Port Angeles, made the call to camp overnight and continue the search in the morning. But I could see he was losing hope. We all were. When someone disappears this completely, especially in conditions that should make them easy to track, it usually means one of 2 things. They're already dead, or they're somewhere we haven't thought to look. We set up camp in the same spot Marcus and I had used the night before. Nobody wanted to sleep near Megan's tent. The dogs were still acting strange, whining and pacing, and their handlers were getting frustrated with them. I volunteered for first watch. Told Rodriguez I was too wired to sleep anyway, which was true. He assigned Marcus to take second watch, then Sarah. We'd rotate through the night, making sure someone was always awake and alert. The forest got quiet as evening fell. That same unnatural silence I'd noticed the night before. No owls, no small animals moving through the underbrush, nothing. Just the occasional drip of water from the trees and the soft sound of people settling into their sleeping bags. I sat on a log at the edge of our camp, my flashlight in one hand and my radio in the other. From where I sat, I could just barely see Megan's tent through the trees, about 100 yards away. It looked gray in the failing light, like a ghost of itself. Around 10 o'clock, the fog rolled in again, thick and fast, like someone had opened a valve. Within minutes, visibility dropped to almost nothing. I could barely see my own hands. The tent disappeared entirely, swallowed by the mist. That's when I heard the footsteps. They were slow, deliberate, moving through the forest somewhere to my left. Not on the trail, not where any of our people were camped, just out there in the darkness and the fog. I stood up, my hand going to the flashlight at my belt. "Hello?" I called out. "Megan, is that you?" The footsteps stopped. I waited, my heart hammering in my chest. The fog seemed to press in closer, and I had the sudden, overwhelming sensation that I was being watched. That something was standing just beyond the reach of my light, studying me. "Megan?" I called again. My voice sounded small and muffled in the dense air. No answer, but I could feel it. Something was out there. I radioed the camp. "We've got movement, west side, maybe 50 yards out. Could be our missing hiker." Rodriguez's voice crackled back. "Roger that. Don't approach alone. Wake Marcus and wait for backup." But I couldn't wait. If that was Megan out there, if she was hurt or disoriented, I needed to reach her now. I stepped off the log and moved toward where I'd heard the footsteps, my flashlight cutting a narrow beam through the fog. "Megan, if you can hear me, call out. We're here to help you. You're safe." Nothing. just that oppressive silence. I kept moving forward, sweeping my light back and forth. The fog was so thick I could barely see 3 feet in front of me. I could hear Marcus calling after me from the camp, telling me to wait, but I ignored him. That's when I saw it. A figure, standing maybe 20 feet ahead, motionless in the fog. Human-shaped, but I couldn't make out any details. "Megan?" I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The figure didn't move, didn't respond. Just stood there, silent and still. I took another step forward, my light focused on the shape. "Megan, it's okay. You're safe now. Let's get you back to camp." And then the figure turned, not toward me, away from me, and it started walking. Not fast, not running, just walking at that same deliberate pace I'd heard earlier. I followed. I know I shouldn't have. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to go back, to get Marcus and the others, to not go into the fog alone. But I couldn't let her disappear again. I couldn't lose her. The figure moved through the forest like it knew exactly where it was going, never hesitating, never stumbling. I struggled to keep up, my flashlight beam bouncing as I hurried after it. The fog seemed to part around the figure, like it was walking through a tunnel of clear air, while I had to fight through the dense mist. "Megan, please stop," I called out. "Let me help you." The figure stopped. I nearly ran into it before I could slow down. We were standing in a small clearing I didn't recognize, surrounded by massive trees. The fog here was less thick, and I could see more clearly. The figure was wearing hiking clothes, a rain jacket and pants, boots, a pack on its back. It was the right size to be Megan, but it was standing with its back to me, perfectly still. "Megan?" I said softly. I reached out to touch her shoulder. The figure turned around. It wasn't her. I mean, it was Megan's face, but something was wrong. Her eyes were open, but they were empty. Not dead, exactly. Just vacant. Like nobody was home. And her expression was completely neutral. No fear, no relief, no emotion at all. "Are you okay?" I asked. The words sounded stupid even as I said them. Obviously, she wasn't okay. Megan didn't answer. She just stared at me with those empty eyes. Then, slowly, she raised one hand and pointed past me, back the way we'd come. I turned to look. The fog had closed in behind us. I couldn't see anything. No camp, no lights, no sign of where I'd come from. When I turned back, Megan was gone. Not running away, not walking, just gone. Like she'd been an image projected onto the fog and someone had turned off the projector. I stood there alone in that clearing, my flashlight shaking in my hand, and for the first time in my career as a ranger, I felt genuine terror. Not the kind of fear you get from a bear or a storm. Something deeper, more primal. I was lost. In a section of forest I'd hiked a dozen times, in fog so thick I couldn't see 10 feet. With something that was either Megan or wearing her face wandering around in the darkness. I tried my radio. Static. No response from camp. I was completely alone. I forced myself to think. To be logical. I knew roughly what direction the camp was. I had my GPS. I could find my way back. I just needed to stay calm. I checked my GPS. The screen was blank. Dead. But I'd charged it that morning. It should have had hours of battery left. Okay. No GPS, no radio. But I had my flashlight and my sense of direction. I could do this. I started walking, keeping my light low to watch for obstacles. The fog seemed to move with me, staying thick no matter which way I went. I should have hit the trail within 5 minutes. I walked for 20 and found nothing. That's when I heard the footsteps again. Multiple sets this time. All around me. Walking in that same deliberate pace, Never fast, never slow. Just constant. Steady. I spun around, my light cutting through the fog. I caught glimpses of figures. Too many to count. All walking, all moving through the trees. All wearing hiking clothes, all with their backs to me. "Hey!" I shouted. "I need help! I'm lost!" None of them responded. They just kept walking. And I realized, with a sinking feeling in my stomach, that they were all walking in the same direction. All moving toward something. Or away from something. I ran. I don't care if it was unprofessional. I don't care if it was the wrong thing to do. I ran through that fog like my life depended on it, because some deep, animal part of my brain was convinced that it did. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs ached, until I couldn't run anymore. And then I stopped, doubled over, gasping for air. The fog had thinned. I could see more than a few feet ahead, and right in front of me was Megan's tent. I was back where I started. I stood there staring at that tent, my breath coming in ragged gasps, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I'd run in a straight line, I was sure of it. There was no way I'd somehow circled back. But here I was, standing in the same clearing I'd left 20 minutes ago. The 3-rock cairn was still there, right where the footprints ended. Except now there were more rocks. Not stacked. Arranged in a circle around the original cairn. Maybe a dozen of them, all roughly the same size, all placed with deliberate care. I heard voices. Marcus and Sarah emerged from the fog, flashlights sweeping back and forth. "There you are," Marcus shouted. He sounded angry and relieved in equal measure. "What the hell were you thinking, running off like that?" "I saw her," I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, hollow. "I saw Megan. She was right there." Sarah and Marcus exchanged a look. "We searched this whole area," Sarah said carefully. "There's nobody out here but us." "I'm telling you, I saw her. She was standing right—" I stopped. How could I explain what I'd seen? The empty eyes, the way she'd vanished. The figures walking through the fog, they'd think I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had. "Come on," Marcus said, putting a hand on my shoulder. "Let's get you back to camp. You're hypothermic. You're not thinking straight." I wanted to argue, but I didn't have the energy. We walked back to camp in silence. Rodriguez was awake, looking concerned. He gave me a blanket and a hot drink from a thermos and asked me what happened. I told him I'd heard footsteps, followed them, got turned around in the fog. I didn't mention seeing Megan, didn't mention the figures in the mist. I could see in his eyes that he already thought I'd made a mistake, that I'd let the stress of the situation get to me. Telling him the rest would only make it worse. The rest of the night passed without incident. I didn't sleep. I sat wrapped in my blanket, watching the fog, waiting for dawn. When the first gray light started to filter through, I felt a wave of relief so intense it almost made me dizzy. Morning brought a new team of searchers, more rangers, more dogs, and a helicopter when the fog finally cleared around 10. They searched for 3 more days, covered every square mile of terrain within a 10-mile radius of Megan's tent. They brought in thermal imaging, sent divers into the nearby streams, even checked caves and old mine shafts. They found nothing. No body, no gear except what was in her tent, no sign that she'd ever existed except for those 3 footprints that ended at the edge of the clearing. On the 4th day, they called off the active search. Megan Hartley was officially listed as missing, presumed dead. Her family was notified. Her tent and belongings were collected as evidence. The case was turned over to the local police, who filed it away with all the other unsolved disappearances in the national parks. I wrote my report, stuck to the facts, found the tent, searched the area, no sign of the missing hiker. I didn't mention the footprints ending, didn't mention the dry interior and wet exterior of the tent, didn't mention the cairn or the figures in the fog or seeing Megan's empty face. I knew how it would sound. But Marcus mentioned it. He told Rodriguez about the footprints, about how they just stopped, about the rocks that appeared overnight. Rodriguez included it in his report, and suddenly there were questions. The Park Service sent an investigator, a woman named Dr. Patricia Reeves, who specialized in SAR operations. She interviewed all of us separately, asked detailed questions about everything we'd seen and heard. When she got to me, I stuck to my official story, but I could tell she knew I was holding something back. She had that way of looking at you, like she could see right through whatever you were trying to hide. "Ranger Theo," she said. She always used my full name, never just my first name. "I've read through the reports, yours, Marcus's, Sarah's. There are some inconsistencies. Everyone remembers things differently," I said. "That's true," she agreed. "But there are details that none of you remember the same way. The position of the tent, the number of rocks in the cairn, the color of Megan's backpack. It's like each of you saw something slightly different." I didn't know what to say to that. She was right. When we'd all compared notes later, we realized that our memories of that clearing didn't quite match up. Little details were different. Nothing major, but enough to be noticeable. "I've worked in these parks for 15 years, Dr. Reeves said. "I've investigated dozens of disappearances, and I'll tell you something off the record. There are places in the wilderness that don't follow the rules. Places where things happen that shouldn't be possible. Where people vanish, where tracks end, where compasses spin and GPSs fail. We don't talk about it publicly because we can't explain it, and what we can't explain, we can't fix." She leaned forward, her eyes locked on mine. "I think you saw something out there, something you can't explain. And I think you're scared that if you tell anyone, they'll think you're crazy. Am I right?" I wanted to tell her. God, I wanted to tell her everything, but I couldn't make the words come out. Because saying it out loud would make it real, and I wasn't ready for that. "I saw exactly what I put in my report," I said. Dr. Reeves studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, Ranger Theo, if you ever change your mind, you have my number." She left the next day, filed her report, recommended the area be more closely monitored, but stopped short of suggesting it be closed. And life went on. But things were different after that. Marcus started requesting assignments in other parts of the park, avoiding the trails near where we'd found Megan's tent. Sarah transferred to Mount Rainier. Jim, who told Sarah about the other disappearances, retired early. And I started paying attention to things I'd never noticed before. The way certain sections of trail always seemed colder than others, even on warm days. The way the fog would roll in suddenly, without warning, in places where the terrain shouldn't generate fog. The way hikers would sometimes come back from certain areas looking shaken, though they could never quite explain why. I started keeping my own records. Anytime something seemed off, anytime a hiker reported something strange, I'd write it down. Date, time, location, description. I kept it all in a notebook in my cabin, never in the official logs. Over the next few months, a pattern emerged. There was a specific area, maybe 2 square miles, centered roughly on the clearing where we'd found Megan's tent. Within that area, people reported all kinds of strange experiences. Compasses that spun wildly, GPS units that died despite fresh batteries, a feeling of being watched, hearing voices in the fog, seeing figures moving through the trees that vanished when approached. And the footprints. God, the footprints. I started checking trails after every search, every incident. And I found them. Tracks that went nowhere. Prints that ended in the middle of clear, soft ground. Sometimes they were hiking boots, sometimes running shoes, once even bare feet. But they all had the same thing in common. They just stopped. I showed them to Rodriguez once. He looked at them, frowned, and said they probably got washed away by rain or covered by leaves. I pointed out that the ground around them was pristine, undisturbed. He didn't have an answer for that. Just told me to file a report if I found anything relevant to an active case. 6 months after Megan disappeared, another hiker went missing. A man this time, mid-40s, experienced backpacker. Last seen heading up a trail that passed within a mile of that same area. His tent was found 3 days later. Set up properly, gear inside, no sign of struggle. And footprints leading a way that ended after 8 steps. The Park Service sent Dr. Reeves back. She walked the area, took measurements, interviewed everyone. She didn't say much, but I could see it in her face. She knew. She knew something was wrong with that place. They called off the search after a week. The man was never found. Dr. Reeves filed her report and left. I never heard what she put in it, but a month later, the Park Service quietly closed that section of trail. They said it was for erosion control, that they needed to do restoration work. But no work crews ever showed up. They just put up signs and rerouted hikers to other trails. I should have felt relieved. They'd closed it. Whatever was happening in that area, at least people wouldn't stumble into it anymore. But I couldn't let it go. I'd see Megan's face in my dreams, those empty eyes staring at me, her hand pointing back toward the camp, and I'd wake up with the same question. What was she trying to tell me? I started going back to that area on my days off, never officially, never in uniform. Just me and a backpack and a hiking excuse. I'd walk the closed trails, looking for, I don't know what. Answers, maybe. Some explanation for what had happened. The cairn was still there, in the clearing where Megan's tent had been. Nobody had disturbed it, even though the Park Service had cleared out everything else. The rocks were still arranged in that circle around the original 3-stone stack. I'd stand there sometimes just looking at it, trying to understand what it meant. Who had built it? The rocks hadn't been there the first night. Marcus and I would have seen them, but they'd appeared sometime between our first watch and dawn. Someone had walked into that clearing while we slept, stacked those rocks, and left without making a sound. Unless it wasn't a someone. Unless it was a something. I started researching. Hit the library in Port Angeles. Read everything I could find about the history of the area. Turns out the indigenous peoples who lived here before white settlement had stories about certain places in the forest. Places they wouldn't go. They called them thin places, where the boundary between the living world and the spirit world was permeable. There was one area in particular that kept coming up in the old stories. A section of forest where hunters would vanish, where people saw strange lights in the fog, where the dead were said to walk. The descriptions matched the area around Megan's clearing almost perfectly. The more I read, the more I realized that this wasn't new. People had been disappearing in that area for centuries. The indigenous peoples knew about it and avoided it. But when white settlers came, they ignored the warnings. And people kept vanishing. The Park Service knew too. They had to. Dr. Reeves had basically admitted it. But they couldn't close a section of a national park because of ghost stories and unexplained disappearances. They needed evidence, something concrete, something they could point to and say, this is the danger. But how do you prove that a place is wrong? That something impossible is happening there? You can't. So they just quietly discourage people from going there. Close trails for maintenance and hope that's enough. It wasn't enough for me. I needed to understand. I needed to know what had happened to Megan, what was still happening in that clearing. So one night in March, almost 5 months after Megan disappeared, I went back. It was a stupid thing to do. Dangerous, I knew that. but I couldn't stop myself. I waited until after midnight, when I knew I'd be alone. Parked my truck at a closed trailhead and hiked in by moonlight. No headlamp, no GPS, just an old magnetic compass and my knowledge of the trails. The forest was quiet. That same unnatural silence I'd noticed before. I could hear my own footsteps, my own breathing, but nothing else. No wind, no animals, nothing. It was like walking through a photograph of a forest rather than an actual forest. I reached the clearing around 2 in the morning. The cairn was still there, visible in the moonlight. The circle of rocks looked almost like a portal, a gateway to somewhere else. I stood at the edge of the clearing, working up the courage to enter. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to turn around, to go back, to leave this place alone. But I'd come this far. I had to know. I stepped into the clearing. Nothing happened. No fog rolled in, no figures appeared, no strange sounds. Just a normal clearing in a normal forest on a normal night. I felt almost disappointed. I walked to the cairn and stood looking down at it. Up close, I could see how precisely the rocks were placed. Not just stacked, but arranged. The outer circle was perfectly round, the spacing between each rock exactly the same. The 3 central rocks were balanced with impossible precision, each one resting on a point barely a quarter-inch across. I reached out to touch the top rock. The forest vanished. I don't mean it got dark or foggy. I mean it literally vanished. 1 second I was standing in a clearing surrounded by trees. The next I was standing in the same clearing, but the trees were gone. The ground was gone. Everything was gone except the clearing itself, floating in a gray void. I spun around, my heart hammering. The cairn was still there. I could still feel solid ground under my feet. But everything else had disappeared. Then I saw them, the figures. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all walking in that same deliberate pace, all moving in circles around the clearing. They were wearing different clothes, different gear. Some looked recent, like hikers from the last few years. Others were wearing older clothes, stuff from the 70s or 80s. A few were in clothes so old I couldn't even identify the era, and I realized these were all the people who had disappeared. All the missing hikers from this area, going back decades, maybe centuries. All of them walking in circles in this gray void, trapped in whatever this place was. I tried to call out to them, but no sound came out of my mouth. I tried to run toward them, but I couldn't move. I was frozen, unable to do anything but watch as they circled the clearing again and again, their faces empty, their movements mechanical. Then I saw her, Megan. She was walking with the others, her face just as empty as theirs. She didn't look at me, didn't acknowledge my presence, just kept walking in that endless circle. I tried to reach for her, to grab her, to pull her out of whatever this was, but I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't do anything. How long I stood there, I don't know. It might have been minutes, it might have been hours. Time didn't seem to work right in that place. But eventually, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Another figure was approaching the clearing, not circling like the others, walking straight toward it, toward me. And as it got closer, I could see its face. It was me, not a reflection, not a trick of the light. It was me walking toward the clearing with that same empty expression, that same mechanical gait as all the others. I watched in horror as my duplicate reached the edge of the clearing and stepped into it. As soon as it crossed the boundary, it joined the circle, started walking around and around with all the others, and I understood. This wasn't a vision of the future. It was a vision of what would happen if I stayed. This place took people, trapped them in this gray void, walking in circles forever. And I was about to become one of them. I jerked my hand back from the cairn. The forest slammed back into existence. Trees, ground, moonlight, everything. I was standing in the clearing, my hand still outstretched, the cairn in front of me. But I hadn't touched it. I'd stopped myself just in time. I stumbled backward, nearly falling. My heart was racing, my hands shaking. What I'd seen, it had felt more real than real. Like I'd actually been in that place, even though I was still standing in the clearing the whole time. I ran. Didn't stop running until I was back at my truck, back on the highway, back in my cabin with all the lights on and the doors locked. I called in sick the next day, and the day after that. I couldn't face the forest, couldn't go back to work knowing what I knew, that there was something in those woods that took people, that trapped them in some kind of gray void, walking in circles for eternity. But I had to tell someone. I couldn't keep this to myself. So I called Dr. Reeves. She met me at a coffee shop in Port Angeles 3 days later. I told her everything. The figures in the fog, seeing Megan's empty face, the cairn touching it, the vision of the gray void. I expected her to look at me like I was crazy, to make some excuse and leave. Instead, she pulled out a notebook, started asking questions, wanted every detail I could remember. Wrote it all down like she was documenting evidence for a case. When I finished, she sat back and looked at me for a long moment. "You're not the first person to tell me something like this," she said quietly. "There are places like this in other parks, places where the rules don't apply, where people vanish without explanation. We don't understand what they are or why they exist, but they're real." "What do we do?" I asked. "Nothing," she said. "We can't. We can close the trails, put up warning signs, discourage people from going there, but we can't stop it. Whatever that place is, it's been there long before the park was established. It'll be there long after we're gone. So we just let it keep taking people?" "We do everything we can to prevent people from going there," Dr. Reeves said. "But beyond that, there's nothing we can do. This is bigger than us. Bigger than the Park Service, bigger than anything we can understand." She closed her notebook and looked at me with something that might have been sympathy. "My advice? Transfer out. Get as far from that area as you can. Because now that you've seen it, now that you've touched that cairn, it knows you're aware of it. And these places, they don't like to be known." I should have listened to her. Should have put in for a transfer that same day. But I didn't. Because I kept thinking about Megan and all those other people walking in circles in that gray void, trapped there forever, while the world moved on without them. Someone had to remember them. Someone had to bear witness to what had happened, even if we couldn't fix it. So I stayed, kept working as a ranger, kept walking those trails. But I never went back to that clearing, never got within a mile of it if I could help it. And I watched for the signs. The strange fog, the cold spots, the feeling of being watched. Any time a hiker came back looking shaken, reporting something odd, I'd document it, add it to my notebook, build a record of everything that happened in that area. Marcus left, like I mentioned, couldn't take it anymore, moved to another state, got a job doing something completely different. I don't blame him, some things are too heavy to carry. The years passed. The trail stayed closed. No one else disappeared from that immediate area, as far as I know. But I kept hearing stories from other parts of the park. Hikers who'd taken wrong turns and ended up in places that didn't match their maps. People who'd lost time, started hiking in the afternoon, and somehow emerged at dawn with no memory of the hours in between. Compasses that spun, GPSs that failed, batteries that died for no reason. It wasn't just that one clearing, that was just the center, the focal point. The whole region was affected. Something about the geology, the geography, the history of the place. Whatever indigenous peoples had sensed centuries ago, it was still there, still active. I started hearing rumors about other rangers who'd had experiences. Quiet conversations in break rooms. Stories shared over beers after long shifts. Most wouldn't talk about it openly, but if you knew who to ask, if you approached it right, they'd tell you things. Strange things, impossible things. There was a ranger at Mount Rainier who swore she'd found a tent floating 3 feet off the ground. Everything inside perfectly arranged, but no sign of the hiker. A ranger at Yellowstone talked about finding boot prints that glowed faintly in the dark, leading into a cave system that didn't exist on any map. Another at Yosemite described finding a campsite where all the gear was arranged in perfect circles, everything from the tent stakes to the scattered pine cones, and in the center was a backpack filled with rocks. All of them had one thing in common. They'd touched something. A cairn, a piece of gear, a tree with strange marks. And after that, they'd seen things. Things they couldn't explain. Things that made them question what was real and what wasn't. I became something of an informal resource. Rangers from other parks would reach out, asking questions. Had I heard about this case? Did I know anything about that incident? I'd share what I knew, what I documented. And slowly, I started to build a bigger picture. These places, these thin places, as the indigenous peoples called them, they existed all over the country. Not just in national parks, though those were the places where they were most often encountered, but also in state forests, BLM land, even private property. Anywhere there was enough wilderness, enough isolation, these anomalies could exist, and they were getting more active. Or maybe people were just going deeper into the wilderness, encountering things that had always been there but went unnoticed. Either way, the incidents were increasing. I brought my concerns to Rodriguez, showed him my documentation, my records of all the strange reports from our park. He listened, looked through my notebook, then handed it back. "This is interesting, Theo," he said. "But what do you want me to do with it? Close down half the park because some hikers got spooked?" The superintendent would laugh me out of his office. "People are disappearing," I said. "People disappear in national parks all the time," Rodriguez replied. "Every year, hundreds of people go missing. Most of them turn up, some don't. That's the nature of wilderness. It's dangerous. People make mistakes. Accidents happen." "This is different," I insisted. "These aren't accidents." Rodriguez sighed. "Maybe. But unless you can give me something concrete, something I can put in a report that won't make us all look crazy, there's nothing I can do." He was right, and I knew it. What could I say? That there was a place in the forest where reality didn't work right? That people were being trapped in some kind of gray void? That I'd touched a cairn and seen visions of the missing? It sounded insane even to me, and I'd lived it. So I kept my documentation private. Kept watching, kept recording, kept waiting for I don't know what, some kind of proof, maybe, some way to make people understand. Then, 2 years after Megan disappeared, something changed. I was hiking a newly reopened trail, doing a routine safety check before we officially let visitors use it. It was a beautiful day, clear and sunny, the kind of day that reminds you why you became a ranger in the first place. I was about 3 miles in when I saw it. A cairn, 3 rocks stacked in the middle of the trail, exactly like the one in the clearing where we'd found Megan's tent. My first instinct was to turn around, to get as far away from it as possible. But I couldn't. This trail was being opened to the public in 2 days. If there was something wrong here, something dangerous, I needed to know. I approached carefully, my phone out and recording. If something happened, at least there'd be some kind of record. The cairn looked identical to the one in the clearing. Same type of rocks, same precise stacking, same impossible balance. I knelt down next to it, careful not to touch it, and examined the ground around it. There were no footprints. No sign that anyone had walked here. The cairn was just there, like it had materialized out of thin air. I stood up and looked around. The forest was quiet, that same unnatural silence. No birds, no insects, no wind. I should have left, should have radioed it in, gotten backup, let someone else handle it. But I was tired of running from this thing, tired of being afraid. So I did something incredibly stupid. I kicked over the cairn, the rocks tumbled onto the trail, the careful balance broken. For a moment, nothing happened. Then I felt it. A change in the air pressure, like my ears needed to pop. The light seemed to dim, even though the sun was still shining, and the forest got even quieter. I backed away from the scattered rocks, my hand going to my radio. That's when I heard it. A sound like wind through a tunnel, but there was no wind. It was coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. Then the fog rolled in. Thick and fast, just like that night when Megan disappeared. Within seconds, I couldn't see more than 5 feet in any direction. Shit, I muttered, and started walking back the way I'd come. But the trail was gone. The ground beneath my feet was the same, but I couldn't find the packed dirt of the trail. Everything looked the same in every direction. I pulled out my GPS. Dead. My phone, too, despite having a full battery 2 minutes ago. Even my watch had stopped. I was in it now. Whatever that place was, I'd triggered it by disturbing the cairn. The fog pressed in around me, and I could hear footsteps. That same deliberate walking I'd heard before, getting closer. I ran, picked a direction and ran, hoping to God I was going the right way. The fog seemed to follow me, staying thick no matter how fast I moved. The footsteps got louder, coming from all sides now. Then I saw them. The figures. They emerged from the fog, walking in that mechanical way. But these weren't far away. They were right there, close enough to touch. Close enough that I could see their faces. They were all wrong. Human-shaped, but not quite human. Their features were blurred, indistinct, like they'd been eroded by wind and water. Their eyes were the worst. Empty pits that seemed to go on forever. I changed direction, trying to avoid them, but there were too many. They were everywhere, walking in circles, creating a maze of moving bodies. And in the center of them, I saw her again. Megan. But this time, she was looking at me. Really looking at me. Her eyes weren't empty anymore. They were full of terror and recognition, and something else. Warning. She mouthed something at me. I couldn't hear her over the sound of all those footsteps, but I could read her lips. Run. I didn't need to be told twice. I picked the direction with the fewest figures and charged through, shouldering past them. They didn't try to stop me, didn't even acknowledge my presence. They just kept walking in their circles. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs felt like they were going to give out. And then suddenly, I broke through. The fog cleared, the forest snapped back into focus, and I was standing on the trail about 100 yards from where I'd started. I bent over, gasping for air, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst. Behind me, the fog was already dissipating, the forest returning to normal. Like nothing had happened, except everything had happened. I'd been in that place again, seen those figures, seen Megan, and this time she'd been aware. She'd tried to warn me. I radioed in that the trail wasn't safe, that we needed to keep it closed. When Rodriguez asked why, I told him I'd found evidence of erosion damage. It was a lie, but what else could I say? That night, I drove to the library. Stayed up until they closed, reading everything I could find about dimensional theory, about places where reality breaks down, about indigenous legends and folklore from the Pacific Northwest. I found a pattern. The indigenous peoples had dozens of stories about these thin places. They weren't evil, exactly. They weren't deliberately trying to hurt people. They were just different. Places where the normal rules didn't apply, where the boundary between here and somewhere else was permeable. And the indigenous peoples had ways of dealing with them. Rituals, offerings, markers. The cairns weren't traps, they were warnings. Markers to say, this is one of those places, stay away. But we'd ignored the warnings, built trails through thin places, encouraged people to hike in areas that should have been left alone. And now people were paying the price. I started looking at maps, comparing the locations of disappearances with maps of indigenous sacred sites and forbidden areas. The correlation was striking. Almost every disappearance in the park over the last 50 years had occurred in or near an area that indigenous peoples had marked as dangerous. We'd thought we knew better, thought that science and GPS and search and rescue training could overcome superstition. We were wrong. I wrote up a report, documented everything. The cairns, the fog, the figures, the correlation with indigenous warnings. I included my own experiences, even though I knew it would make me sound crazy. And I submitted it to Rodriguez with a recommendation. Consult with local tribal elders about identifying and marking thin places throughout the park. Rodriguez called me into his office the next day. He had my report on his desk. "This is quite a document," he said. His tone was neutral, but I could see the concern in his eyes. "It's all true," I said. "I believe you," Rodriguez said, which surprised me. "I've worked in these parks for 25 years. I've seen things I can't explain. I know there's something out there. But Theo, I can't submit this. You know I can't." "Why not?" "Because it suggests that large sections of our park are fundamentally dangerous for reasons we can't control or even fully understand. If this got out, if the media got hold of it, it would destroy tourism. The Park Service would lose millions. I'd be fired, you'd be fired, and the superintendent would probably burn every copy of this report and pretend it never existed." "So, what do we do?" I asked. Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "We do what the Park Service has always done. We close trails that seem dangerous. We keep records. We search for missing people as long as we can, and we hope it's enough." "It's not enough," I said. "I know," Rodriguez agreed. "But it's all we've got." He handed the report back to me. "Keep this. Add to it. Maybe someday things will be different. Maybe someday we'll be able to acknowledge what's really out there. But for now, this stays between us." I took the report and left. He was right, and I hated that he was right. The truth wouldn't set anyone free. It would just create panic and chaos. So I kept working, kept documenting, kept watching, and the disappearances continued. Not often, maybe one every year or two, but always in the same areas, always with the same signs. Tents found with no one in them. Tracks that ended. Gear arranged in strange patterns. I started putting up unofficial markers, little cairns at the entrances to thin places, positioned where hikers would see them. Not the 3 rock stacks that seemed to appear naturally, but different arrangements. 5 rocks, or 7, anything to signal, "This is a warning, stay away." Sometimes the markers would be knocked over or removed. I don't know if it was people or something else, but I'd go back and rebuild them. It was all I could do. Marcus reached out to me once, about 3 years after he left. Said he heard I was still at Olympic, still working the same areas. Asked if I was okay. I told him I was fine, told him I was doing what needed to be done. He was quiet on the phone for a while, then said, "You can't save them, Theo. Whatever's happening out there, we can't stop it. I know, I said, but I can bear witness. Someone has to remember. He understood that, told me to be careful, told me not to touch any more cairns. We haven't spoken since. Dr. Reeves contacts me occasionally, sends me reports from other parks, other rangers who've encountered similar phenomena. The network of people who know about the thin places is small but growing. We share information, compare notes, try to identify patterns. There's talk of putting together a comprehensive guide, a field manual for rangers working in areas with unexplained disappearances. Something that acknowledges what's really happening without saying it explicitly. Ways to identify thin places, how to mark them, what to tell hikers who want to explore certain areas. It'll never be official. The Park Service would never approve it, but it might help. It might save lives. I still think about Megan, think about her walking in that gray void, trapped in an endless circle with all the others who've disappeared. I think about how she looked at me that second time, how she tried to warn me. Part of her was still in there, still aware, still fighting against whatever that place was. Sometimes I wonder if there's a way to get them out. If I could go back, could touch the cairn again, could I reach through and pull someone back? Megan, or any of the others. But I know that's a fantasy. That place doesn't let go. Once you cross that boundary, once you step into the circle, you're there forever. The best I can do is make sure no one else joins them. It's been 11 years since Megan disappeared. 11 years of walking these trails, watching these forests, documenting the undocumentable. I'm not the ranger I used to be, the one who thought the wilderness was something we could understand and control. Now I know better. The wilderness is vast and strange and full of things we'll never understand. There are places where our rules don't apply, where physics and logic break down, where people can vanish without a trace because they've stepped into somewhere that isn't quite here. The indigenous peoples knew this. They respected it. They marked the thin places and stayed away. We should have listened, but we didn't. And now people like me spend our careers trying to manage something that can't be managed, trying to protect people from dangers we can't explain, trying to document the impossible in the hope that someday someone will find a way to make sense of it. I'm writing this down now because I'm retiring at the end of the year. 22 years of service and I'm done. I've given everything I can to this place. But I can't do it anymore. Can't keep walking trails knowing what's out there. Can't keep finding cairns and wondering if this is the one that'll trap me like it trapped Megan. My replacement starts in January. Young guy, fresh out of training, eager to prove himself. I've tried to tell him things, tried to warn him about certain areas, but I can see in his eyes that he thinks I'm just an old ranger spinning ghost stories. Maybe he'll learn. Maybe he'll see what I've seen and understand. Or maybe he'll be one of the lucky ones who works here for years and never encounters anything strange. I hope he is. I hope the thin places stay quiet for him, but I doubt they will. The forest has been here longer than any of us. It'll be here long after we're gone, and the thin places, those breaks in reality where the impossible becomes possible, they're part of it. Part of something bigger and older and stranger than we can comprehend. All we can do is respect it. Mark the boundaries. Warn people away and remember those who've been lost. I keep a list in my cabin. Names and dates. Everyone who's disappeared in or near a thin place during my time here. Megan Hartley is at the top. Under her name are 16 others. 16 people who walked into the forest and never walked out. 16 families who never got closure. 16 mysteries that will never be solved. Sometimes I read the list before I go to bed. Say the names out loud, like a prayer or a memorial. Someone should remember them. Someone should acknowledge that they existed, that they mattered, that their loss means something. And I think about that gray void, about all those figures walking in endless circles, about Megan's face the last time I saw her, full of warning and terror, and a desperate need to be remembered. I remember, Megan. I remember all of you. Last week I went back to the clearing one final time. The cairn is still there, perfectly balanced, surrounded by its circle of rocks. The trail is still closed, though the signs are weathered now. Nature is reclaiming the path as it should. I stood at the edge of the clearing, careful not to step inside. I didn't touch the cairn, didn't disturb anything. Just stood there for a while, looking at it, thinking about everything that happened here. The forest was quiet. That same unnatural silence. Like the trees themselves were holding their breath. Waiting. I left markers on the trail leading to the clearing. 5 cairns, carefully placed. Different from the 3-rock stack. A warning to anyone who finds this place. Turn back. Go another way. Don't enter the clearing, don't touch the rocks, don't become another name on the list. Then I walked away. Didn't look back. Didn't let myself think about what might be standing in that clearing, watching me leave. I'm done now. I've told my story. I've documented what I know. If you're reading this, if you're a ranger or a hiker or just someone who loves the wilderness, please take this seriously. The thin places are real. The disappearances are real, and the danger is real. If you see a cairn that seems wrong, if you find yourself in a place where the forest goes silent, if you encounter fog that rolls in too fast or tracks that end for no reason, turn around. Get out. Don't try to understand it. Don't try to explore it. Just leave. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. Some places aren't meant to be explored. And some people who go missing in the wilderness don't get lost. They step into somewhere else. Somewhere that doesn't let them come back. Megan Hartley stepped into one of those places. So did 16 others during my time here, and hundreds more over the years, across all the national parks, all the wild places where the thin places exist. This is my warning. This is my documentation. This is everything I know. Stay out of the thin places. Respect the boundaries. Listen to the warnings. And if you see a 3-rock cairn in the middle of a trail, walk the other way. The rain never really stops in the Hoh rainforest. It just pauses sometimes, takes a breath, then starts again. In my 7 years as a ranger at Olympic National Park, I've learned to tell the difference between the various kinds of rain we get out here. There's the heavy downpour that drums on your hood and turns trails into streams. There's the mist that's so fine it doesn't seem like rain at all until you realize you're soaked through. And then there's the steady, persistent drizzle that defines this place. Constant, unchanging, eternal. That's the rain that was falling on the morning of September 14th, 2021. The kind that makes everything look gray and soft, like the whole forest is wrapped in gauze. My partner Bryce and I were 3 miles into a routine patrol when we got the call. Ranger station to field units, we have a possible distress situation. Female caller reports hearing someone calling for help on the Spruce Nature Trail. Caller is now back at her vehicle. Can you respond? I clicked my radio. This is Ranger Lila Oaks with Ranger Bryce Morrison. We're about 20 minutes from Spruce Trail. Responding now. Bryce looked at me, water dripping from the brim of his ranger hat. He'd been with the Park Service for 15 years, longer than I'd been doing this job, and I'd learned to read his expressions. Right now, he looked concerned, but not alarmed. Spruce Trail is pretty straightforward, he said as we changed direction. Half-mile loop, all boardwalk, hard to get lost on it. Maybe someone went off trail, I suggested. In this weather, you'd have to be pretty stupid. I didn't respond to that. People did stupid things in national parks all the time. We'd pulled a guy out of a ravine last month because he'd decided to take a shortcut back to his car. Before that, it was a woman who'd tried to cross a swollen creek in flip-flops. Stupid was part of the job description. We made good time back to the trailhead. The parking area was nearly empty. Just 2 vehicles. One was a newer Subaru with Washington plates, the other an older Honda. A woman was standing next to the Subaru, wrapped in a rain jacket that looked too expensive for actual hiking. She was maybe late 40s, blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail, and she looked genuinely shaken. "Are you the one who called?" I asked, as Bryce and I approached. "Yes, thank God you're here. There's someone out there. I heard them yelling for help." "Can you show us where you were when you heard this?" Bryce asked. The woman nodded and started walking toward the trailhead. I was maybe halfway around the loop. I'd stopped to take a picture of the moss on one of the big trees, and that's when I heard it. A man's voice, I think, yelling help over and over. "How far away did it sound?" I asked. "That's the thing," she said, and I could hear the confusion in her voice. It sounded close, but also far away, like it was echoing or something. I called back, asked if they were okay, but then it just stopped. We reached the start of the boardwalk. The Spruce Nature Trail is one of the most accessible in the park, a raised wooden walkway that winds through old-growth forest, designed so people can experience the rainforest without trampling the delicate ecosystem. It's beautiful and eerie in equal measure. Massive Sitka spruce trees tower overhead, their trunks wrapped in moss. Everything is green, a dozen different shades of it. The air smells like earth and decay and life all mixed together. "Show us the spot," Bryce said. We followed the woman along the boardwalk. Our boots made hollow sounds on the wood. Water dripped from every surface. The forest was quiet except for the constant whisper of rain on leaves. The woman stopped at a curve in the trail. "Here, this is where I was standing." I looked around. Dense forest on both sides of the boardwalk. Ferns as tall as my waist. Fallen logs covered in moss, slowly decomposing back into the forest floor. Nurse logs, we called them. Dead trees that gave life to new growth. "Which direction did the voice come from?" Bryce asked. The woman pointed toward the north, off the trail into the deeper forest. "That way, I think, but I'm not completely sure." The sound was strange, like I said, kind of echoey. Bryce and I exchanged a look. The forest could do weird things to sound, especially in the rain. Voices could carry in unexpected ways, bounce off trees, seem to come from places they didn't originate. "All right," I said to the woman. "We'll check it out. You should head back to your car. If we need any more information, we have your number from when you called." She nodded, clearly relieved to be leaving. "Please find them. They sounded really scared." After she left, Bryce and I stood on the boardwalk listening. The rain was constant, a white noise that filled every space, but beneath it, if you listened carefully, you could hear other things. Water dripping from branches, the distant sound of a creek, the occasional creak of a tree settling. "You hear anything?" Bryce asked. I shook my head. "Nothing but rain." Could have been an animal. Elk can make some weird sounds. Could have been, I agreed. But something about this didn't feel right. Maybe it was the way the woman had described the voice. Close, but far away, echoing strangely. Or maybe it was just the atmosphere of this place, the way the rain and the moss and the massive trees created an environment that felt ancient and unknowable. "We should do a quick sweep," I said, "just to make sure." Bryce nodded. We stepped off the boardwalk, immediately sinking ankle-deep into soft, wet earth. The forest floor here was a sponge, saturated with water. Every step made a soft, squelching sound. We moved slowly, carefully, calling out every few yards. "Hello? Anyone out here? This is the Park Service. If you need help, call out." Nothing, just the rain and the creaking trees. We searched in widening circles from the spot where the woman had been standing, covering maybe a quarter-mile in each direction. It was slow going. The underbrush was dense, and we had to watch where we stepped. The last thing we needed was to twist an ankle or impale ourselves on a broken branch. After about 40 minutes, we regrouped on the boardwalk. "Nothing," Bryce said. "No tracks, no signs of disturbance, no gear left behind." "Maybe they found their own way out," I suggested. Realized they weren't actually lost. Maybe. But Bryce didn't sound convinced. He had that look on his face again. The one that said something was bothering him, but he couldn't quite put his finger on what. We decided to walk the rest of the loop, just to be thorough. The boardwalk curved through the forest, crossing small streams on wooden bridges, passing massive nurse logs and trees so big it would take 4 people holding hands to circle them. Everything looked normal, peaceful even. Just another rainy day in the rainforest. We were almost back to the trailhead when Bryce stopped suddenly. "You hear that?" he whispered. I froze, listening. At first, I heard nothing but the usual forest sounds. Then I caught it. A voice, faint, distant, but definitely a human voice. "Help!" it called. "Someone help me." My heart rate kicked up. "There," I said, pointing east. "It's coming from that direction." But Bryce was frowning. He pulled out his compass, checked it, then looked at where I was pointing. "That's wrong," he said. "What do you mean wrong?" "The voice. It's coming from the east. But the parking lot is west. The main trail system is west. There's nothing to the east but deep forest for miles. Why would anyone be out there?" I listened again. The voice was clearer now, more urgent. "Help! Please! Someone help me!" "Does it matter why they're there?" I asked. "Someone needs help." "Yeah, but..." Bryce shook his head. "Something's not right about this." "Ranger Morrison to station," he said into his radio. "We have a confirmed distress call on the east side of Spruce Trail, requesting additional units for search and rescue." The radio crackled. "Copy that, Morrison. What's your exact location?" Bryce gave our coordinates. "The voice is coming from approximately 200 yards east of the boardwalk. Dense forest, difficult terrain." "Roger. Additional units en route. ETA 30 minutes. We looked at each other. 30 minutes could be a long time if someone was seriously injured. "We should start heading that direction," I said. "Get a head start before the others arrive." Bryce hesitated, then nodded. "All right, but we stay together, and we're careful. This terrain is nasty." We stepped off the boardwalk again, this time heading east. The voice continued to call out, sounding more desperate with each cry. "Help me! Please! Someone! We're coming!" I shouted back. "Keep calling out so we can find you." We pushed through the underbrush, ducking under low branches, stepping over fallen logs. The forest here was even denser than where we'd searched before. Old growth that hadn't been touched by human hands in decades, maybe centuries. Trees so massive they blocked out what little light filtered through the clouds. "Help!" The voice was louder now. We had to be getting close, but something was strange. The voice never seemed to move. We were clearly getting closer. It was definitely getting louder. But it didn't sound like it was coming from a slightly different angle as we approached. It just kept coming from straight ahead, constant and unchanging. "You notice that?" Bryce asked. He'd picked up on it too. "Yeah, weird echo effect maybe." Maybe. We kept going. The rain was picking up, transitioning from drizzle to a steadier downpour. Water ran down my neck despite my hood. My pants were soaked from brushing against wet ferns and low branches. "Help! Someone please help me!" We were close now. Had to be. The voice sounded like it was just ahead, maybe 50 feet. Then Bryce grabbed my arm. "Lila, stop!" I turned to look at him. His face was pale, his eyes wide. "What?" I asked. He held up his compass. The needle was spinning, not just drifting or adjusting, actually spinning in complete circles, like it couldn't find north. "That's not normal," I said. "No, it's not." Bryce pulled out his GPS unit. The screen was scrambled, showing impossible coordinates. "What the hell?" "Help!" The voice called again. So close now, it felt like the person should be right in front of us. "Please, I'm scared." I swept my flashlight beam through the trees ahead. Nothing. No person, no signs of anyone, just moss-covered trunks and dense undergrowth. "Where are you?" I called out. "We're right here. Call out so we can find you. Help me, please." The voice was coming from directly in front of us. I was sure of it. But there was nothing there. I could see clearly for about 30 feet in every direction. And there was no one. "This doesn't make sense," I said. Bryce was turning in a slow circle, his compass still spinning uselessly in his hand. "The voice isn't coming from in front of us." "What do you mean?" "I can hear it clearly. It's right." "Listen," Bryce interrupted. He closed his eyes, his head tilted. "Really, listen. Don't just hear it. Listen to where it's actually coming from." I forced myself to stand still, to filter out all the other sounds. The rain, the dripping water, the creak of trees. Focus only on the voice. "Help! Someone help me!" And then I understood what Bryce meant. The voice sounded like it was in front of us, but there was something else beneath that, something my brain had been filtering out. An echo, maybe, or a reflection. And that underlying sound, it was coming from behind us. I turned around slowly. We'd come maybe 300 yards from the boardwalk, pushing through dense forest. But when I looked back now, I couldn't see the trail. Couldn't see any sign of the direction we'd come from. The forest looked the same in every direction. "We're turned around," I said quietly. "No." Bryce checked his compass again. Still spinning. "We came straight east. The trail should be right back that way." But it wasn't. We both knew it wasn't. Somehow, impossibly, we'd gotten disoriented. "Help!" The voice cried out again, and now I could hear it clearly. It was coming from the west, from the direction of the boardwalk, from the direction we'd just come from. "That's not possible," I whispered. "We were just there. There was no one there." Bryce's jaw was tight. "We need to get back to the trail, now." We started walking west toward where the voice was coming from, toward where we thought the boardwalk was, but the forest seemed to resist us. Every step felt wrong. Trees that should have been familiar weren't. Landmarks we thought we'd passed looked different. "Help, please, anyone!" The voice was getting fainter, like we were moving away from it instead of toward it. "This is wrong," Bryce said. "This is all wrong." I tried my radio. "Ranger Oaks to station. We have a situation. Our GPS is malfunctioning and we're having difficulty determining our exact location. Request guidance." Static, then faintly, "Say again, Oaks. You're breaking up." "We need navigational assistance. Our equipment is malfunctioning." More static. The signal was getting worse, not better. "Station, do you copy?" Nothing. Just dead air. Bryce tried his radio with the same result. Whatever was interfering with our compasses and GPS was also affecting our communications. "We can't be that far from the trail," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We've only been walking for maybe 20 minutes. In difficult terrain and poor visibility, People can get lost within 100 yards of safety, Bryce said. He was quoting from the training manual, I realized. Falling back on what we knew, what we'd been taught. Help! The voice was behind us now. Definitely behind us. We turned to face it. That doesn't make sense, I said. We've been moving toward where the voice is coming from. It should be getting closer, not... I stopped, because I just realized something. The voice had been calling out regularly, every 15 to 20 seconds. But in the last minute, it had called out 4 times. The interval was getting shorter. It's speeding up, Bryce said. He'd noticed it too. Help! 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 3 times in quick succession. And the voice sounded different now. Less human. The pitch was wrong, the cadence off. Like someone was doing an impression of a person calling for help rather than actually calling for help. We need to move, Bryce said. Pick a direction and move. Get away from that sound. What about the person who needs help? There is no person. Bryce's voice was hard, certain. There never was. This is something else. I wanted to argue, but I couldn't. Because he was right. Whatever we were hearing, it wasn't a lost hiker, it wasn't a person at all. We started walking, faster now, trying to maintain a straight line even though we had no way to verify our direction. The voice continued behind us, calling out with increasing frequency. Help! 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 Over and over, the pauses between each call getting shorter until it was almost continuous, and it was getting louder, following us. We broke into a jog, then a run, crashing through underbrush, no longer caring about stealth or caution. We just needed to get away from that sound. I don't know how long we ran. Could have been 5 minutes, could have been 20. Time felt strange, elastic. But eventually, we burst through a line of trees and stumbled onto something hard and flat. The boardwalk. We'd found the boardwalk. I bent over, gasping for breath, my heart hammering. Bryce was beside me, equally winded. Behind us, the forest was silent. The voice had stopped. What the hell was that? I managed to say between breaths. Bryce shook his head. He was looking back at the trees with an expression I'd never seen on him before. Fear. Pure, undisguised fear. I don't know, he said. But we need to get off this trail, now. We walked quickly along the boardwalk, back toward the parking lot. Neither of us spoke. What was there to say? That we'd heard a voice that came from the wrong direction. That our equipment had malfunctioned in impossible ways. That we'd gotten lost less than a quarter mile from a well-marked trail. It all sounded crazy, but it had happened. We reached the parking lot to find 3 other rangers waiting, the backup that had been called. They looked concerned when they saw us. "What happened?" asked Sarah, one of the rangers. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Equipment failure," Bryce said, his voice flat. "Compass and GPS both malfunctioned. We got temporarily disoriented." "Did you find whoever was calling for help?" Bryce and I looked at each other. What could we say? That the voice had been impossible? That it had moved in ways voices shouldn't move? "Negative," I said. "We searched the area, found no signs of distress, no lost hikers. Likely a false alarm." Sarah frowned. "But we heard the call too, when we were driving up, someone yelling for help. We heard it through the car windows." My blood went cold. "You heard it? From the parking lot?" "Yeah, clear as day. That's how we knew where to come. We followed the sound." "What direction was it coming from?" Bryce asked, his voice tight. Sarah pointed, east, toward the deep forest, toward where we'd been. "But that can't be right," said Tom, another ranger. "I had my window down on the other side of the truck. The sound was coming from the west. I'm sure of it." Sarah shook her head. No, definitely east. I remember thinking it was weird because there's no trail that direction. It was west, Tom insisted. They started to argue, their voices getting louder. Bryce grabbed my arm and pulled me aside. They heard it from different directions, he whispered. The same voice from 2 different places at once. I felt sick. That's not possible. None of this is possible. But it's happening. I looked back at the trailhead, at the forest beyond. It looked peaceful, normal, just trees and moss and rain. But I knew better now. There was something in there. Something that could throw sound in impossible ways, that could make compasses spin and GPS units fail. Something that could mimic a human voice calling for help. We need to close this trail, I said. On what grounds? Equipment malfunction. Acoustic anomalies. They'll think we're crazy. I don't care what they think. Something's wrong here, Bryce. People could get hurt. Before he could respond, his radio crackled to life. All units, we have another situation. Overnight camper at Hoe Lake hasn't checked in. Last known location was the Hoe Lake Trail. He was due to radio in 2 hours ago. Bryce and I exchanged a look. Hoe Lake was 6 miles north of where we were. Different trail system entirely. Copy that, Bryce said into his radio. What's the status on the search at Spruce Trail? Calling it off. No evidence of a person in distress. Likely a false alarm or acoustic anomaly. We need all available units to focus on the Hoe Lake situation. Understood. Oakes and Morrison responding. We drove to the Hoe Lake trailhead in silence. I kept thinking about that voice, about how it had seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, about how it had gotten faster, less human as we ran from it. Have you ever heard of anything like this before? I finally asked. Bryce was quiet for a long moment. No, he said. But I've heard stories. Rangers talk, you know. Swap experiences over beers after shifts. And there are things people mention sometimes. Strange sounds in the forest. Equipment failures. Voices that don't make sense. And everyone usually laughs it off. Chalks it up to stress or fatigue or overactive imagination. But sometimes, he trailed off. Sometimes what? Sometimes you see it in their eyes. They're not joking. They're not imagining things. They really experience something they can't explain. We pulled into the Hoe Lake trailhead. 2 other ranger vehicles were already there, along with a civilian car, presumably belonging to the missing camper's friend or family member. A woman in her 30s was talking to the rangers, gesturing frantically. As we approached, I could hear her voice. He radios in every 6 hours when he camps alone. Always. It's our system. He was supposed to call at 3 o'clock. It's almost 5 now and nothing. Something's wrong. Ma'am, I understand you're concerned, said one of the rangers, a guy named Pete. But sometimes people lose track of time when they're camping, or their radio batteries die. There are a lot of innocent explanations. Not for Marcus, the woman insisted. He's obsessive about communication, about safety. If he hasn't called, it's because he can't. Bryce stepped forward. We'll find him, ma'am. Can you tell us exactly where he was planning to camp? The woman pulled out a map, pointing to a spot near Hoe Lake. Here. He was going to set up near the North Shore. He has all the proper gear, plenty of experience. He knows these trails. All right, Bryce said. We'll head up there now. It's about a 3-hour hike. We should reach his camp before dark. The woman looked relieved. Thank you. Please find him. Tell him his sister's worried sick. We geared up quickly. Bryce and I would take point, with Pete and Sarah following as backup. 4 rangers for 1 missing camper was probably overkill, but after what had happened at Spruce Trail, I was glad for the extra hands. The Whole Lake Trail was tougher than the nature walk. 6 miles of steady climbing through old-growth forest, crossing streams, navigating rocky sections. But it was a popular trail, well-maintained, with good markers every quarter mile. The rain had lightened to a drizzle again. Everything was wet and slippery. We moved at a steady pace, calling out periodically. "Marcus, this is the Park Service. If you can hear us, respond." Nothing. Just the sound of our boots on the muddy trail and water dripping from the trees. We were about 2 miles in when Pete's radio suddenly burst to life with static. Then a voice. "Help!" Faint. Barely audible. "Can anyone hear me? I need help." We all stopped dead. "Marcus?" Pete said into his radio. "Is that you? What's your location?" More static. Then, I don't know. I got turned around. I'm lost. Please, I need help." Pete tried to get more information, but the signal was weak and intermittent. All we could determine was that the person on the radio, presumably Marcus, claimed to be lost somewhere off-trail. "Can you see any landmarks?" Pete asked. "Anything distinctive?" There's a big fallen tree, covered in moss, and a stream. I can hear a stream." That described about 90% of this forest. Not helpful. "Stay where you are," Pete instructed. "We're coming to find you. Keep your radio on so we can track your signal." We picked up the pace, moving faster now. Every few minutes, Pete would radio Marcus, and we'd get a burst of static in response. We were trying to triangulate his position based on signal strength, but something was bothering me. I pulled Bryce aside as Pete and Sarah moved ahead. "This feels wrong," I said quietly. "What do you mean?" "The voice on the radio. Did it sound right to you?" Bryce frowned. "It was pretty garbled, hard to tell." "Yeah, but..." I couldn't quite put my finger on what was bothering me. The cadence was off, the way he spoke. It reminded me of... I stopped, because I realized what it reminded me of. The voice at Spruce Trail, the one that had called for help from the wrong direction, the one that had gotten faster and less human as we ran from it. "No," Bryce said, reading my expression. "You think it's the same thing?" "I think we need to be careful." We caught up with Pete and Sarah. They were standing at a fork in the trail, Pete holding his radio up, trying to get a clearer signal from Marcus. "Signal's strongest to the left," Pete said. "But that doesn't make sense. The left fork goes away from Whole Lake. Why would he be that direction?" "Maybe he got disoriented," Sarah suggested. "Went the wrong way when he was trying to get back to the main trail." Maybe. But Pete didn't sound convinced. We took the left fork. The trail here was narrower, less maintained. Within a quarter mile, it had degraded to barely more than a game trail. "Marcus!" Pete called out. "Can you hear us?" His radio crackled. "Yes, I can hear you. You sound close." "Keep talking," Pete said. "We'll follow your voice." "I'm here. I'm right here. Please hurry." We pushed forward, following the sound. But with each step I felt more and more uneasy. Something was wrong. The voice on the radio was too eager, too insistent. And then I noticed something. I stopped walking and pulled out my own radio, switched to the frequency Marcus was supposedly using. Nothing. No signal at all. "Pete," I called out, "what frequency are you on?" He checked his radio. 142.425. Why? That's not the Park Service frequency. Pete looked at his radio again, confused. "But I'm on the right channel. I didn't change it." I checked my radio again, made sure I had the correct frequency. Still nothing. "So who's he talking to?" Sarah asked. We all looked at each other. Pete's radio crackled again. "Hello? Are you still there? Please don't leave me out here." Pete lifted his radio to respond, but Bryce grabbed his wrist. "Don't," he said. "Don't answer it." "What? Why not?" "Because that's not Marcus," I said. "I don't know what it is, but it's not him." Pete stared at me like I'd lost my mind. "What are you talking about? Of course it's Marcus. Who else would it be?" "Listen to it," Bryce said. "Really listen. The cadence, the word choice. Does it sound like a real person to you?" Pete looked uncertain. The radio crackled again. "Hello? Can you hear me? I need help. Please respond." And then I heard it. What had been bothering me all along. The voice was calling for help, but there was no emotion in it. No fear, no desperation, no relief at making contact. Just words, spoken in a flat, mechanical way, like someone reading from a script. "Please respond," the voice said again. "I need help. Can you hear me?" "That's not human," Sarah whispered. Her face had gone pale. "What the hell is it, then?" Pete demanded. None of us had an answer. We just stood there on that narrow trail, listening to the thing on the radio repeat its plea for help over and over, each repetition sounding less and less like actual human speech. Then, from somewhere in the forest ahead of us, we heard another voice, not on the radio, a real voice carrying through the trees. "Help! Someone help me! I'm lost!" It was coming from the same direction we'd been heading, the same direction the radio voice had been leading us. "We need to go back," I said, "right now." "But what about Marcus?" Pete asked. "The real Marcus. We need to find him." "He's not that direction," Bryce said with certainty. "Whatever's out there, it's not Marcus, and we don't want to find it." The voice in the forest called out again, louder now. "Help! Please! I can see your lights! I'm right here!" But we hadn't turned on our flashlights. It was still light enough to see without them. "Move," Bryce said. "Now!" We turned and started back down the trail, walking quickly. The voice behind us continued to call out, getting louder, more insistent. "Come back! Don't leave me! Please!" And under that, barely audible, we could hear something else. A sound that wasn't quite human. A clicking or chittering, like insect sounds but deeper, more resonant. We didn't run. Running on a narrow trail in fading light was a good way to break an ankle or fall off a ledge. But we moved as fast as we safely could, putting distance between ourselves and that terrible voice. When we finally made it back to the main trail, the sun was setting. The forest was filling with shadows, and the rain, which had been constant all day, suddenly stopped. Not gradually, not a natural lessening of precipitation. It just stopped, like someone had turned off a faucet. We all noticed it at the same time. Stood there on the trail, looking up at the sky where the clouds were breaking apart, revealing stars. "That's not normal," Sarah said. "The weather patterns here don't change that fast." She was right. In the rainforest, weather systems moved in gradually and left gradually. You could sometimes see rain coming from miles away, but this was instant, like someone had reset the weather. "What's happening?" Pete asked. He sounded scared, and I didn't blame him. Everything about this felt wrong. "I don't know," Bryce said. "But we're leaving, all of us, right now." We hurried back down the trail toward the trailhead. None of us spoke. We just walked, fast as we could in the growing darkness, desperate to get out of the forest. We made it back to the parking lot just as full darkness fell. Marcus's sister was still there, waiting anxiously by her car. When she saw us emerge without her brother, her face crumpled. "Where is he?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Did you find him?" Pete stepped forward, and I could see him struggling with what to say. How do you tell someone that you heard their brother calling for help? But you don't think it was really their brother? That something in the forest was imitating him? We're going to need to organize a full search party, Pete said carefully. We made contact via radio, but we weren't able to locate him before dark. We'll head back out at first light with more people and better equipment. It was a lie, or at least a partial truth, but what else could we say? The woman wiped her eyes. He's out there alone all night. He must be terrified. Your brother is experienced, I said, trying to offer some comfort. He knows how to handle himself in the wilderness. The best thing we can do now is wait for proper light and mount a thorough search. She didn't look comforted, but she nodded. We gave her the number for the ranger station and sent her back to town with instructions to try to get some rest. She drove off, leaving the four of us alone in the parking lot. For a long moment, nobody spoke. We just stood there under the stars. Stars we shouldn't have been able to see through the rain clouds, listening to the forest. It was completely silent. No insects, no birds, no rustling of small animals. Nothing. "All right," Sarah said finally. "Someone needs to say it. What the fuck just happened?" "I don't know," Pete admitted. "But that voice on the radio, that wasn't right. You all heard it too, right? How it sounded wrong." We all nodded. "And the rain stopping like that?" Sarah continued. "That's impossible. Weather doesn't work that way." "A lot of things that happened today are impossible," Bryce said, "but they happened anyway." "So, what do we tell the superintendent?" Pete asked. "That we heard a creepy voice and ran away? That the weather changed too fast? He'll think we're crazy." "Maybe we are crazy," I said. "Maybe there's a rational explanation for all of this, and we just haven't thought of it yet." But I didn't believe that, and neither did anyone else. We'd all felt it, that wrongness in the forest, that sense that we'd encountered something that shouldn't exist. "We need to go back tomorrow," Pete said. "Marcus could really be out there. The real Marcus, lost or injured. We can't abandon a search because we got spooked by some weird acoustics." "It wasn't just acoustics," Bryce said sharply. "And you know it." "Then what was it?" Pete challenged. "Tell me what you think we encountered out there." Bryce opened his mouth then closed it. Because what could he say? That we'd heard something inhuman imitating human distress calls? That some kind of entity in the forest was luring people off trail? It sounded absurd. "I think we need to be very careful," Bryce said finally. "Whatever we do tomorrow, we do it smart. We stay together, we stay on marked trails, and we don't follow voices unless we can visually confirm they're coming from an actual human being." We all agreed to that. Made plans to meet back here at dawn with more rangers and proper search equipment. Then we headed to our respective vehicles. Bryce and I drove back to the ranger station in silence. I kept thinking about that voice, about how it had led us deeper into the forest, away from the trail. If we'd kept following it, where would we have ended up? What was waiting for us out there? "This happened to you before, didn't it?" I said suddenly. "At Spruce Trail this morning. The same thing." Bryce didn't answer right away. He kept his eyes on the road, his hands tight on the steering wheel. "Yeah," he said finally. "Same pattern. Voice calling for help, coming from the wrong direction. Equipment malfunction. And that feeling like something was watching us, waiting for us to make a mistake. Why didn't you say something?" "And say what? That I think there's something in the forest that mimics human voices? That it's intelligent enough to lure rescuers off trail? Nobody would believe me. Hell, I barely believe it myself." We pulled into the station parking lot. It was after 8, and most of the other rangers had gone home for the day. Just the night dispatcher was inside, monitoring radios. We headed to the break room and started making coffee. Neither of us wanted to go home. We needed to process what had happened, to try to make sense of it. "I've been doing this job for 15 years, Bryce said, pouring coffee into a mug. "And I've never encountered anything like this. Never heard of anything like this. What the hell are we dealing with?" "Maybe we should look at the incident reports," I suggested. "See if there's any pattern of similar events." We spent the next 2 hours going through files. The Park Service kept detailed records of every search and rescue operation, every missing person case, every strange occurrence. And what we found was disturbing. Over the last 10 years, there had been 17 separate incidents of rangers or hikers reporting voices calling for help when no one was found. Most were dismissed as false alarms or acoustic anomalies. But when we plotted them on a map, a pattern emerged. They were all in the same general area, a roughly 5-square-mile section of the park that included both Spruce Trail and Hoe Lake Trail. And they all happened during or immediately after periods of rain. "Look at this one," I said, pointing to a report from 3 years ago. Ranger reported hearing multiple voices calling for help simultaneously from different directions. When he investigated, he found no one. His compass malfunctioned, and he got temporarily lost. "And this one," Bryce said, pulling up another file. "Hiker claimed to have followed a voice calling for help for over an hour. The voice stayed the same distance away the entire time, never getting closer. She eventually realized she'd walked in a complete circle. There were more. A ranger who'd found a radio on the trail that was broadcasting distress calls, but when he picked it up, it was dead. No batteries inside. A couple who'd heard their daughter's voice calling to them from the forest, even though their daughter was safely at home in Seattle. A solo hiker who'd recorded audio of a distress call on his phone, but when he played it back later, the voice was speaking in a language he didn't recognize. This has been happening for years," I said. "Why haven't we heard about it?" "Because each incident is written off individually," Bryce said. "Equipment malfunction, acoustic anomaly, stress-induced hallucination. Nobody's looking at the pattern. Nobody's connecting the dots. Until now." We kept digging, went back further in the records, looking for anything similar. And we found something interesting. In the older reports from the 1980s and 90s, there were references to echo phenomena in certain parts of the park. Rangers were advised to be cautious when investigating distress calls in those areas, to verify visually before committing to a rescue attempt. "They knew," I said. "The old-timers knew something was wrong, but it's not in any of the current training materials." "Probably got dismissed as superstition," Bryce said. "New management comes in, wants to modernize, cuts out anything that sounds too folksy or unscientific." I thought about that, about how indigenous peoples had lived in this area for thousands of years before white settlers arrived. They'd had stories about these forests, warnings about certain places, and those warnings had been dismissed as primitive superstition. Maybe they'd known something we didn't. "We need to talk to someone who's been here longer," I said. "Someone who might remember the old warnings." "Garrett," Bryce said immediately. "Garrett Sullivan. He's been a ranger here for 30 years. If anyone knows about this, it's him." We called Garrett at home. It was late, almost 11, but he picked up on the second ring. "This is Sullivan." "Garrett, it's Bryce Morrison. I'm sorry to call so late, but I need to ask you about something. About echo phenomena in the park." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Where are you?" Garrett asked. "At the station, with Ranger Oaks." "Stay there. I'm coming in." He hung up before we could ask any more questions. Garrett arrived 20 minutes later. He was in his late 50s, built like a bear, with gray in his beard and the kind of weathered face that comes from spending decades outdoors. He poured himself a coffee and sat down heavily at the break room table. "Tell me what happened," he said. We told him everything. The voice at Spruce Trail, the radio contact with Marcus, the equipment failures, the rain stopping suddenly. Garrett listened without interrupting, his expression growing more grave with each detail. When we finished, he sat back and rubbed his face with both hands. "I'd hoped we were done with this," he said quietly. "It's been quiet for almost 5 years. I thought maybe it had stopped." "What had stopped?" I asked. "What is it?" Garrett looked at us for a long moment as if weighing how much to tell us. "We don't know what it is," he said finally. "We just know what it does. It mimics human voices, lures people off trails. And if you follow it far enough..." He trailed off. "What?" Bryce prompted. "What happens if you follow it?" "Some people come back disoriented, with no memory of where they went or how long they were gone. Their equipment is dead. Their clothes are soaked, even if it hasn't rained. Some people don't come back at all." The hair on the back of my neck stood up. "How many people?" "6 that we know of over the last 40 years. Maybe more before records were properly kept. All experienced hikers. All last seen following voices calling for help." "Jesus," I whispered. "In the old days," Garrett continued, "we had protocols, warnings posted at trailheads about acoustic anomalies, training for new rangers about how to identify false distress calls, rules about never following voices alone, always verifying visually before committing to a rescue." "What happened to those protocols?" Bryce asked. "Budget cuts, modernization. A new superintendent who thought it was all nonsense. Said we were scaring tourists with ghost stories. He had all the warnings taken down, removed the training material from the curriculum." Garrett shook his head bitterly. "And then people started disappearing again." "Why didn't you say something?" I asked. "I tried, filed reports, requested meetings with management. I was told to focus on real safety issues, not folklore. After a while, I stopped pushing. Figured I'd just try to keep people safe in other ways. Close trails for maintenance when the phenomena seemed active. Route hikers away from problem areas." "Is it active now?" Bryce asked. Garrett nodded slowly. "Seems like it. The pattern matches. Multiple incidents in a short time period, all in the same general area. Equipment failures. Weather anomalies." He looked at us seriously. "You two are lucky you recognized what was happening and turned back. A lot of rangers don't. They're trained to help people in distress. That instinct to rescue overrides their common sense." "What about Marcus?" I asked. "The camper who's actually missing. He could be in real trouble." "He could be," Garrett agreed. "Or he could already be gone, taken by whatever this thing is." "We have to search for him," Bryce said. "His sister's counting on us. We can't just abandon him." "I know," Garrett said, "but we do it smart. Large group, stay together, stick to main trails, and if anyone hears a voice calling for help, we verify it's real before we respond." Agreed? We agreed. Garrett left around midnight, promising to join the search party in the morning. Bryce and I tried to get some sleep in the bunk room at the station, but neither of us could settle. I kept thinking about those 6 people who'd disappeared. Wondered what had happened to them, where they'd gone. And I thought about that voice, how convincingly it had mimicked human distress, how it had known exactly what to say to make us want to help. That was the most disturbing part. It understood human psychology well enough to exploit our compassion, our training, our instinct to rescue. What kind of thing could do that? At dawn, we assembled the search party. 8 rangers in total, plus a volunteer search and rescue team from the county. Garrett briefed everyone on what he called acoustic anomalies, not explaining what they really were, just warning everyone to be cautious about following voices without visual confirmation. We hiked back up to Hoe Lake, taking the main trail this time. The weather was clear. No rain for the first time in days. The forest looked different in sunlight. Less oppressive, more familiar. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. We reached Ho Lake around 10 in the morning. It was a beautiful spot, a pristine alpine lake surrounded by rocky peaks, the water so clear you could see 20 feet down. There were several established camping spots around the shore. We found Marcus's camp on the north side of the lake, exactly where his sister had said it would be. And what we found there made my blood run cold. The tent was set up perfectly, guy lines properly tensioned, stakes driven in at correct angles. Inside, his sleeping bag was laid out neatly, his pack organized. His stove was sitting on a flat rock, ready to use. A water filter hung from a tree branch. Everything was exactly as it should be, except Marcus was gone, and his boots were sitting outside the tent, empty. "Who takes off their boots and then leaves camp?" Sarah asked, voicing what we were all thinking. Bryce knelt down next to the boots. "They're still laced up," he said, "like he just stepped out of them." We searched the entire area around the lake, called out Marcus's name over and over, found nothing. No tracks leading away from the camp, no signs of a struggle, no indication of where he'd gone. But we did find something else. On a tree about 50 yards from Marcus's tent, someone had carved a symbol. It wasn't letters or numbers, just a simple mark. 3 parallel lines, vertical, about 6 inches long. "What's that?" I asked Garrett. He stared at the carving, his face pale. "It's a warning," he said quietly. "The old rangers used to mark trees like this in areas where the phenomena was active. 3 lines means severe danger. Stay away." "When was this carved?" Bryce asked. Garrett ran his finger over the marks. The cuts were deep, the wood inside still relatively fresh. "Recently," he said. "Within the last few days, maybe." "Marcus?" I suggested. "Maybe he carved it as a marker. Or maybe someone else carved it," Garrett said. "Someone trying to warn him." We searched until afternoon, but found nothing more. No sign of Marcus. No indication of where he might have gone. It was like he'd simply vanished from his tent, leaving everything behind. Finally, reluctantly, we had to admit that we weren't going to find him. Not today. Maybe not ever. We documented the campsite, collected his belongings as evidence, and started the hike back down. Nobody talked much on the way down. We were all thinking the same thing. Marcus was the 7th person to disappear in this area, and based on the historical pattern, he probably wouldn't be the last. When we got back to the trailhead, Marcus's sister was waiting. We had to tell her we hadn't found her brother, had to watch her break down crying, had to promise we'd keep searching even though we all knew it was probably hopeless. After she left, we stood in the parking lot, none of us wanting to acknowledge what we all knew. "We need to close this area," I said. "The whole section. No more hiking, no more camping. Not until we figure out what's happening." "On what grounds?" Pete asked. "We can't tell the superintendent we're closing trails because of a monster that imitates voices. He'll have us all evaluated for mental fitness." "Then we find another reason," Bryce said. "Dangerous wildlife, unstable terrain. I don't care. But we can't let more people go in there." We argued about it for another hour, but eventually agreed. We'd petition to close the area, cite safety concerns, be as vague as possible about the specifics. It might not work, but we had to try. Over the next week, we did everything we could. Filed reports, requested meetings with management, presented data on disappearances and incidents, and we were shot down every time. "There's no evidence of any specific danger," the superintendent told us. "Tragic as these disappearances are, they're not statistically significant. People go missing in wilderness areas all the time. But the pattern," Garrett started. is coincidence, the superintendent interrupted. I understand you're concerned, but I can't close a major section of the park based on speculation. We left his office defeated. Without concrete evidence, without something we could point to and say, this is the danger, we had no power to change anything. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Marcus, about Megan Hartley from Spruce Trail, about all the others who'd disappeared. Thinking about that voice so convincingly human, so perfectly designed to trigger our rescue instincts, and I made a decision. If management wouldn't close the trails, I'd do what Garrett had been doing. Watch for signs of increased activity, quietly discourage people from hiking in dangerous areas, put up unofficial warnings when I could. It wasn't enough, I knew it wasn't enough, but it was something. The disappearances continued, not often, maybe once or twice a year, but always in that same 5-square-mile section of the park, and always with the same pattern. Experienced hikers, proper gear, no signs of struggle. Just gone. Bryce transferred to Mount Rainier after a year. He couldn't handle it anymore, couldn't keep working in a place where something was hunting people and nobody in authority would acknowledge it. I stayed. Someone had to keep watch, to warn hikers when I could, to document the pattern. I started keeping my own records. Every incident, every report of strange voices or equipment failures, every disappearance. What I found was disturbing. The incidents were getting more frequent. In the 40 years before I started, there had been maybe a dozen documented cases. In the 7 years since, there had been 23. Whatever this thing was, it was becoming more active. I contacted indigenous communities whose ancestors had lived in this area. Eventually, a few elders agreed to share their knowledge. They told me about the voice caller, a part of the forest itself, they said, a predator that had learned to mimic human speech. The forest is a living thing, one elder told me. It hunts. The voice caller is one of its methods of feeding. How do you stop it? You don't, she said. You respect it. You acknowledge its territory and stay out of it. You teach your children to never follow voices in the forest unless they can see who's calling. But we'd trained an entire society to respond to exactly the kind of lure the voice caller used. We'd turned ourselves into perfect prey. I tried to share this information with the Park Service. It was dismissed as folklore. So I kept watching, kept documenting, and kept trying to save who I could. In September 2023, a solo female hiker named Jennifer Park disappeared from the Hoe Lake Trail. Same pattern. Experienced hiker. Proper gear. Campsite intact. Her phone was in her tent. Her last text said everything was fine. By morning, she was gone. We searched for 2 weeks, found nothing. After Jennifer disappeared, I went to the media. Gave an interview about the unusually high number of disappearances. The Park Service was furious, but the interview had an effect. Hikers started avoiding that area. And for 6 months there were no disappearances. Then, in March 2024, the voice caller adapted. A family of 4 was hiking on the Keynote Loop Trail. They heard a child's voice calling for help. The parents went to investigate and found a boy, maybe 7 years old, standing alone in the forest. He looked completely human. They tried to help him. And then the boy smiled. His face started to blur. His voice changed, became deeper, not human at all. And he said, "Thank you for following me." The parents ran. They reported the incident immediately. This time, the Park Service couldn't dismiss it. There had been a visual sighting, multiple witnesses, something that looked human but wasn't. The story got out, spread online. Tourism dropped, and the Park Service was finally forced to implement new protocols. Rangers were instructed to investigate all distress calls in pairs or groups, never alone. Warning signs were posted about disorientation phenomena. It was something, not enough, but something. Garrett retired in 2024. Before he left, he gave me a file. 40 years of personal notes about the voice caller. "You're the keeper of this knowledge now," he told me. "Don't let them forget." Last month, there was another incident. A climber named David Torres was attempting a solo ascent near Hoh Lake. He radioed that he was turning back. That was the last anyone heard from him. Search teams found his gear scattered, his emergency beacon sitting on a rock. And carved into a tree nearby were 3 parallel lines. The warning mark. He's still missing. Probably will be forever. I'm writing this now because I'm leaving the Park Service. After 8 years, I can't do this anymore. Can't keep watching people disappear. But before I go, I need to leave a record for whoever comes after me. The voice caller is real. It exists in the forests of Olympic National Park, primarily around Hoh Lake. It mimics human voices, particularly distress calls. It can create visual manifestations that appear human but aren't. It's intelligent, it learns, it adapts. Each year, it gets better at luring people. It's most active during or after rain. Equipment failures are common near it. Compasses spin, GPS units malfunction. Weather can change suddenly in its presence. The traditional protocols work. Travel in groups. Verify all distress calls visually. Trust your instincts. Stay on marked trails. And never follow a voice calling for help unless you can see who's calling. I don't know what the voice caller is. The indigenous peoples have stories going back centuries. European settlers reported similar phenomena in the 1800s. This isn't new. The forest has always been here, and the voice caller has always been part of it. We've forgotten how to read the forest's warnings. We've dismissed traditional knowledge. We've built trails into areas we should have left alone. My advice to future rangers and hikers: respect the warnings, listen to the elders, trust your instincts, and if you hear a voice calling for help in the forest, if you feel that pull to investigate, stop. Make sure you can see who's calling. Because if you can't see them, they probably aren't human. Last week, on my final patrol, I hiked to Hoh Lake one last time. It was a clear day. The lake was mirror still. Everything was quiet. Then, from the forest behind me, I heard a voice. "Help!" Faint. Distant. A woman's voice, weak and frightened. "Help me, please!" I turned around slowly. No sign of anyone. "Someone help me!" The voice was coming from the north, from deep forest where there were no trails. And I knew it wasn't a real person. It was the voice caller, calling to me specifically, trying one more time. I spoke quietly to the forest. "I know what you are, and I'm not following you." The voice stopped immediately. The forest went silent. Then I heard something else. A clicking or chittering, low and rhythmic, like acknowledgement. The sound faded. The forest returned to normal. I left Hoh Lake that day and haven't been back. My replacement starts next week. I've tried to brief her about the dangers. Showed her my files, told her about the voice caller. She listened politely, but I could see the skepticism. She thinks I'm paranoid. Maybe she's right. Maybe I've been doing this too long. But I don't think so. All I can do now is leave this record. Hope that someone reads it and takes it seriously. Stay safe. Stay on the trails. Trust your instincts, and never follow a voice unless you can see who's calling. The forest is listening, and it's hungry. I've been a park ranger at Olympic National Park for 9 years. In that time, I've learned to trust my instincts about the forest. When something feels wrong, it usually is. When the hair on the back of your neck stands up for no reason, there's probably a reason you just haven't identified yet. But I'd never experienced anything like what happened on the Enchanted Valley Trail in November 2022, and neither had my partner, Ranger Sloan Hartley. It started with a routine call. A day hiker named Patricia Drummond had failed to return from what was supposed to be an 8-mile out-and-back hike. Her husband called it in around 6 in the evening, said she'd left at 9 that morning and should have been back by 3 at the latest. He'd waited, thinking maybe she'd extended her hike, decided to enjoy the forest a bit longer. But when 4 o'clock came and went, then 5, then 6, he knew something was wrong. Patricia was meticulous about schedules, he'd told dispatch. She always came back when she said she would. Sloan and I were dispatched to search the trail. We left the station around 7, just as the last light was fading from the sky. The rain had been constant all day, not heavy, just that persistent drizzle that soaks through everything eventually. The kind of rain that's so common here you stop thinking about it. It becomes background noise, like the hum of electricity or the sound of your own breathing. We reached the trailhead and geared up. Headlamps, Jeep's units, radios, emergency supplies, standard search and rescue kit. I checked my equipment twice, a habit from years of training. Battery levels, signal strength, compass calibration. Everything was functioning perfectly. The plan was simple. Hike the trail Patricia had taken, call out her name, look for any signs of her. If we didn't find her by the turnaround point, we'd radio for additional support and establish a base camp for a more extensive search in the morning. "Ready?" Sloan asked, adjusting her pack. She'd been with the Park Service for 6 years, and we'd partnered on dozens of searches together. She was methodical, careful, exactly the kind of person you wanted beside you in an emergency. I nodded. "Let's find her." We'd done dozens of searches together. This should have been routine. I'd even hiked this particular trail 3 times in the past year during routine patrols. I knew it well, or thought I did. The trail started out easy, wide, well-maintained, clear markers every quarter mile. We moved at a steady pace, calling out every few minutes. "Patricia! Park Service, if you can hear us, call out." Nothing but the sound of rain on leaves and our boots on muddy ground. The forest had that muffled quality it gets at night, like we were walking through a soundproofed room. Our voices seemed to die just a few feet from our mouths, absorbed by the moss and the rain and the darkness. About 2 miles in, Sloan stopped. "Owen, look at this." She was standing next to a trail marker, one of the wooden posts with a reflective blue diamond that marked the official route. But something was off about it. The post was angled wrong, like it had been pulled partway out of the ground and shoved back in at a different angle. The concrete footing at its base was cracked, dirt and small stones scattered around it. "Vandalism?" I suggested, though even as I said it, I wondered who would bother. The trail was miles from the nearest road, and the weather had been terrible all week. Not exactly prime conditions for teenage troublemakers. "Maybe." Sloan pulled out her phone and took a picture, documenting the marker's position and condition. But who vandalizes trail markers in the rain? And look, the wood isn't damaged, just repositioned, like someone carefully dug it out and put it back wrong. I knelt down to examine the base. She was right. The post itself showed no signs of violence, no saw marks, no hammer damage, no graffiti. Just that wrong angle, pointing about 15 degrees off from where it should have been. "We should report this when we get back," I said. Could be someone trying to misdirect hikers. We kept moving. Over the next mile, we found 3 more markers that looked disturbed. Not broken or removed, just repositioned. like someone had deliberately turned them to point in slightly different directions. Each one was documented with Sloane's phone, the pictures time-stamped and geotagged. "This is weird," Sloane said as we passed the third one. "We should document all of these. If someone's deliberately trying to confuse hikers, that's a serious safety issue." Agreed. I made notes in my own phone, marking GPS coordinates for each marker. Maybe it's connected to Patricia's disappearance. Maybe she followed one of these false directions and got lost. But something about that theory didn't sit right. Patricia was an experienced hiker, according to her husband. She'd done this trail before, knew the area. Would she really be thrown off by a few repositioned markers? We photographed each marker as we passed, making notes of their positions. It was probably nothing. Kids messing around, or maintenance work that hadn't been logged properly. But it nagged at me. Trail markers don't move themselves. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized something else was bothering me. The markers weren't just repositioned randomly. They were all angled in the same general direction, northeast into deeper forest away from the established trail, like they were pointing toward something. We reached the 4-mile point, the halfway mark where Patricia should have turned around. There was a small clearing here, a natural rest spot with a view of the valley below, though in the darkness and rain we couldn't see much beyond the reach of our headlamps. And that's where we found her pack. It was sitting on a fallen log, perfectly positioned like someone had carefully placed it there. Not dropped or abandoned. Placed. The pack was upright, zippers closed, not a single item scattered on the ground around it. Even the rain hadn't gotten inside. Whoever had set it down had done so deliberately, almost ceremoniously. Sloane and I approached cautiously, our training kicking in. An abandoned pack could mean anything: injury, disorientation, even foul play. But something about the careful placement bothered me more than if it had been thrown aside in panic. "Patricia," I called out, louder this time. "Patricia Drummond. We're park rangers. Where are you?" No response. The forest was eerily quiet. Even the rain seemed to have lessened, as if the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting. Sloane pulled on gloves before opening the pack. Protocol, in case we needed to preserve evidence later. Everything was inside. Water bottles still half full, energy bars unopened, a first aid kit that hadn't been touched, car keys, wallet with her ID clearly visible. Even her phone, though when Sloane pressed the power button, the screen stayed dark. "Dead battery?" I suggested. Sloane tried the power button again, holding it longer. Nothing. She pulled out her own phone and used it as a flashlight to examine Patricia's. No visible damage, it just won't turn on. Why would she leave her pack? Sloane wondered aloud, echoing my own thoughts. Everything she needs is right here. Water, food, her way to call for help. Maybe she set it down to rest and then got disoriented, I said. But even as I spoke, I knew how weak that sounded. If you're lost and disoriented, you don't carefully place your pack on a log and walk away. You panic. You run. You do stupid things. But you don't gently set down your pack like you're coming right back. I checked the log itself, looking for any signs. Scuff marks, impressions in the moss, anything that might tell us how long the pack had been there or which direction Patricia had gone. But the moss was undisturbed except where the pack sat, and there were no clear footprints in the soft ground around the clearing. We radioed in the find, our voices crackling through the static. Dispatch told us to continue searching the immediate area. If Patricia was nearby, injured or disoriented, we needed to find her before the temperature dropped any further. The forecast called for temperatures in the low 40s tonight. Not dangerous for someone with proper gear, but Patricia had left that gear behind. We split up slightly, staying within visual range of each other, and began searching and widening circles from where we'd found the pack. I swept my headlamp beam across the ground, looking for footprints, broken branches, any sign of passage. The ground was soft from the rain, perfect for holding prints. But I found nothing. No tracks, no disturbed undergrowth, no signs that anyone had walked through here recently except us. That's when I noticed something strange. There was a trail marker about 50 yards off the main path, in a direction where no trail should be. I walked over to it, frowning. It was identical to the official markers, same wooden post, same blue reflective diamond, same weathered appearance. But according to my map, there was no trail here. This area was supposed to be untracked forest, off limits to casual hikers. "Sloan," I called. "Come look at this." She made her way over, her own headlamp beam bouncing through the trees. When she saw the marker, she pulled out her GPS unit and checked our location, then double-checked against the paper map she always carried as backup. "That's not on any map," she said, her voice tight with concern. "There's no trail marked here. Not on the GPS, not on the Park Service maps, not even on the old survey maps from the 70s. Could it be an old trail, something that got decommissioned but never removed? Maybe." But Sloan didn't sound convinced. She walked past the marker looking for signs of a path, and there was one. Faint, but definitely there. A narrow track through the underbrush, just wide enough for a single person. The ground was worn, vegetation trampled, exactly like you'd expect from a maintained trail, but it wasn't maintained, or at least it shouldn't have been. "Should we follow it?" I asked. Though I already suspected I knew what Sloan would say, she hesitated. Every instinct in our training said to stay on marked trails, especially at night, especially in poor weather. But if Patricia had seen this marker and thought it was official, she might have followed this path thinking it was the correct route. She might have believed she was still on the main trail, heading back to the trailhead, when in fact she was walking deeper into unmapped forest. "Let's go a little way," Sloan decided. "But we stay together, and if it gets too sketchy, we turn back immediately. Agreed?" Agreed. We followed the narrow trail. It wound through dense forest, the trees pressing in close on both sides. My shoulders brushed against moss-covered trunks. Water dripped from branches overhead, finding its way down my collar despite my rain gear. Every 50 yards or so, there was another marker. All identical. All properly positioned. Reflective diamonds catching our headlamp beams and shining back at us like animal eyes. The trail was too well marked to be abandoned, too maintained to be unofficial. Someone had put time and effort into creating this path, maintaining it, marking it. But who? And why wasn't it on any of our maps? "This doesn't feel right," I said after about 10 minutes. "This path is too maintained to be abandoned, but it's not on any official map. And look," I pointed to a marker we were passing. "These markers are newer than the ones on the main trail. The wood isn't as weathered." "I know," Alone said. She checked her GPS again, then frowned. "That's weird." "What?" "According to this, we haven't moved. It says we're still at the 4-mile marker where we found the pack. I checked my own GPS. Same thing. Our position showed us exactly where we'd been 10 minutes ago, even though we'd clearly walked a significant distance. I could see the faint glow of our own boot prints in the mud behind us, proof that we'd been moving." "Equipment malfunction?" I suggested, though I didn't believe it. Both units failing the same way at the same time seemed like too much of a coincidence. "Let's mark our position manually," Sloan said. She pulled out a can of orange spray paint, standard search and rescue equipment for marking your route, and painted a large X on a tree trunk. "If we need to backtrack, we'll be able to find our way. I'll mark every 100 feet or so." "Good idea." I pulled out my own compass to check our heading, wanting to at least maintain a sense of direction even if the GPS wasn't working. The needle swung lazily, pointing northeast. I tapped the compass, watched the needle settle. Northeast. We were heading northeast deeper into the forest away from the trailhead. I made a mental note, knowing we'd need to reverse that bearing to find our way back. We continued forward. Every 100 feet, Sloan painted another X. The trail kept going, those markers appearing at regular intervals, and our GPS units kept insisting we hadn't moved from that clearing 4 miles in. Then, suddenly, the trail ended. Not gradually, not tapering off into nothing. It just stopped. One moment there was a clear path ahead. The next, we were facing a wall of dense underbrush, and the last trail marker was pointing backward, toward the way we'd come. "What the hell?" I said. Sloan swept her light across the area. "The trail just ends. That's not normal. Should we push through the brush, see if it continues?" "No." Sloan's voice was firm. "Something's wrong here, Owen. Wrong trail, GPS not working, path that goes nowhere. We need to head back and report this." I agreed. We turned around and started retracing our steps, following Sloan's orange X marks. But after walking for what felt like 10 minutes, we hadn't seen a single marked tree. "Where are the X's?" I asked, trying to keep the concern out of my voice. Sloan was scanning the trees with her headlamp. "I don't know. I marked them. I know I did." We kept walking, faster now. The trail markers were still there, still pointing the way. But Sloan's markings had vanished. And worse, the trail looked different somehow. The trees were in wrong places. The path curved when I remembered it being straight. "Sloan, I think we're on a different trail." "That's not possible. We followed the markers back the way we came." "Then, where are your marks? And why does this look different?" She didn't have an answer. We kept walking, our headlamps cutting narrow beams through the darkness. The rain had picked up again, a steady drumming on the leaves above us. After another 15 minutes, we emerged into a clearing. But it wasn't the clearing where we'd found Patricia's pack. This was different, smaller, with a large boulder in the center that I definitely would have remembered. "This isn't right," Sloan said, her voice tight. "This isn't where we started." I checked my compass. The needle was spinning slowly, refusing to settle on any direction. "Compass is out too." We tried our radios. Static. No signal at all, which shouldn't have been possible. We were only a few miles from the station. Sloan took a deep breath, clearly trying to stay calm. "Okay, new plan. We pick a direction and walk until we hit the main trail or a road or something we recognize." "Which direction?" She pointed toward what should have been west, based on the position of the moon, barely visible through the clouds. "That way. If we keep going west, we'll eventually hit the coast road." We set off, leaving the clearing behind. But we'd only gone about 50 yards when we saw it. A trail marker. The same blue diamond, the same wooden post, pointing back toward the clearing we'd just left. "No," Sloan whispered. "No, that's not right. We just came from there." "Maybe it's marking a different trail," I said, though I knew it wasn't. "Let's keep going." We walked around the marker, pushing through the underbrush. And 50 yards later there was another marker, and another beyond that, all pointing back toward that clearing with the boulder. "It's hurting us," I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. "The markers. They're trying to make us go in circles." "Trail markers don't hurt people, Owen. They're just signs." "Then why do they keep pointing back the way we came? Why are they here at all when this isn't a marked trail?" Sloan didn't answer. She was staring at something ahead. I followed her gaze and felt my stomach drop. There, maybe 30 yards in front of us, was the clearing with the boulder. The same clearing we'd left 5 minutes ago. We'd walked in a straight line, I was sure of it. but somehow we'd ended up right back where we started. "This isn't possible," Sloane said. "I know. We need to stay calm, think logically. There's an explanation for this." But her voice was shaking, and I could see the fear in her eyes that mirrored my own. Because neither of us could think of a logical explanation for what was happening. We tried again, this time going in a different direction. And again, after a few minutes of walking, we found ourselves back at that clearing. The boulder sat there in the center, solid and unchanging, like an anchor holding us in place. On our fourth attempt, I noticed something. "Sloane, look at that tree." There was a large hemlock at the edge of the clearing, and on its trunk was an orange X. "I didn't mark that," Sloane said. "I didn't mark any trees in this clearing." We walked over to it. The orange paint was fresh, still slightly wet, and as we got closer I could see other marks on nearby trees. Orange X's, dozens of them, covering the trunks in a chaotic pattern. "Someone else marked these," I said. "Another ranger, maybe? Someone who got lost here before?" But Sloane was backing away from the tree, her face pale. "Owen, look at the paint can in my hand." I looked. It was half empty. When we'd started using it, it had been nearly full. "You marked these trees," I said slowly. "We've been here before, multiple times, walking in circles. But I'd remember marking the same tree over and over." "Would you?" I asked. "Because I don't remember seeing this clearing more than once, but all this paint says otherwise." We stood there in the rain, staring at those orange marks, trying to make sense of what they meant. How long had we been walking in circles? How many times had we returned to this spot without realizing it? And then I heard something that made my blood run cold. Footsteps. Someone was walking towards the clearing, branches snapping under their feet. "Patricia!" I called out. "Is that you?" The footsteps stopped. For a moment there was only silence. Then they started again, faster now, running toward us. A figure emerged from the trees. It was a woman, middle-aged, wearing hiking clothes. She stumbled into the clearing and collapsed to her knees. "Thank God," she gasped. "I've been lost for hours. Please, you have to help me get out of here." It was Patricia Drummond. Sloane and I rushed to her side. Patricia was soaked through, shivering, clearly exhausted. But she didn't appear to be injured. "We've been looking for you," I said, shrugging off my jacket and draping it over her shoulders. "Are you hurt? What happened?" "I got turned around," Patricia said through chattering teeth. "I was hiking back to the trailhead and I saw a trail marker pointing a different direction. I thought maybe I'd misremembered the route, so I followed it. And then..." She trailed off, her eyes filling with tears. "I couldn't find my way back. I kept walking in circles. Every time I thought I'd found the main trail, I'd end up right back here." "How long have you been lost?" Sloane asked. "I don't know. Hours. It feels like hours. What time is it?" I checked my watch. Almost 9 p.m. "That's impossible," Patricia said. "It was only 3 o'clock when I stopped for a break. That was just a few minutes ago." "Ma'am," Sloane said gently, "you left for your hike at 9 this morning. It's been 12 hours. Patricia stared at us in disbelief. No, that can't be right. I remember checking my watch. It was 3 o'clock. I exchanged a glance with Sloane. Disorientation and time distortion weren't uncommon in lost hikers, especially if they were in shock or hypothermic. But Patricia didn't seem hypothermic. Cold, yes, but not showing the classic signs. "Let's focus on getting you out of here," I said. "Can you walk?" "I think so." Patricia got to her feet, steadying herself against Sloane. "Which way is the trail?" That was the question, wasn't it? Sloane and I had been trying to find our way out for the better part of an hour and had gotten nowhere. "We're going to figure that out," Sloane said, with more confidence than I knew she felt. "Owen, let's try your idea. We'll pick a direction and stick to it no matter what. Even and if we see that clearing again, we keep going. Maybe we've been turning back without realizing it." It was as good a plan as any. We chose northeast, away from the boulder, away from the densest underbrush. And we started walking, the three of us in a line, with Patricia in the middle. We walked for what felt like 20 minutes. No trail markers this time, which should have been encouraging. Just trees and rain and the sound of our footsteps. My legs were aching, and I could hear Patricia breathing hard behind me. Then Sloane, who was in the lead, stopped so suddenly I almost ran into her. "No," she said. "No, no, no." I looked past her and felt my heart sink. The clearing, the boulder, the trees covered in orange X's. "We walked in a straight line," I said. But even as I spoke, I knew how impossible that sounded. "I was watching. We didn't turn around." "The forest is turned around," Patricia said quietly. "That's what's happening. The forest itself is wrong." "That's not," Sloane started to say, then stopped. Because what could she say? That forests don't rearrange themselves. That trails don't move. We'd been experiencing exactly that for the past hour. "Has this happened before?" I asked Patricia. "When you were lost, did you experience anything like this?" "Yes," Patricia said. "I kept trying to backtrack, follow my own footprints, but the footprints would disappear, or they'd lead me in circles, and the markers—" She pointed to the edge of the clearing. "The markers kept changing." "Changing how?" Sloane asked. "They'd point one direction, and I'd follow them. Then I'd come back the same way, and they'd be pointing a different direction. Like someone was moving them while I wasn't looking." I thought about the markers we'd seen on the way in, the ones that had been repositioned. I'd assumed it was vandalism, but what if it was something else? What if the trail itself was changing? "We need to stop moving," Sloane said suddenly. "Every time we try to leave, we end up back here. Maybe we're supposed to stay here." "Stay here and wait for what?" I asked. "Daylight, other rangers. Someone will realize we're missing when we don't report back." She was right. We'd been overdue for check-in almost an hour ago. Dispatch would send someone. We just had to wait. But waiting meant spending the night in this clearing, in the cold and rain, with something wrong happening all around us. The thought made my skin crawl. We sat down near the boulder, the three of us huddled together for warmth. Patricia was shaking, whether from cold or fear I couldn't tell. Probably both. Sloane tried the radio again, cycling through all the emergency frequencies. Still nothing but static. That hiss of white noise that sounded almost like whispered voices if you listened too long. GPS still showed us at the 4-mile marker, even though we'd been walking for hours. My watch said it was 10:47 p.m. We'd been in the forest for almost 4 hours. It felt like days. "Tell me something," Patricia said, her voice small in the darkness. "This isn't normal, is it? For the Park Service, I mean. This doesn't happen all the time." "No," I admitted. There was no point in lying to her. "This is new for us, too. So, what is it? Why is this happening?" I didn't have an answer. Neither did Sloane. We sat in silence, listening to the rain, waiting for dawn. I tried to think of rational explanations. Magnetic anomalies affecting our equipment. Some kind of disorienting fog or gas seeping from the ground. Mass hallucination. But none of it fit. Our equipment wasn't just malfunctioning, it was lying to us. And all three of us were experiencing the same impossible things. Around midnight, according to my watch, though time felt meaningless now, we heard footsteps again. All three of us tensed. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, circling the clearing just beyond the tree line. They had a strange rhythm to them, not quite matching the pattern of human walking. Step, step, pause. Step, step, pause. Like something learning how to walk. "Hello?" I called out, my voice steadier than I felt. "Who's there?" The footsteps stopped. Then, from the darkness, a voice called back. My voice. "Hello! Who's there?" The words were perfect. Exact duplicates of my tone, my inflection, even the slight tremor of uncertainty at the end. It was like listening to a recording of myself, except I'd never made any recording. I felt ice run down my spine. That was my voice, but it wasn't me speaking. Sloane grabbed my arm, her fingers digging in hard enough to hurt. "Don't respond," she whispered urgently. "Don't say anything else." The footsteps resumed, still circling. And now there were more voices. Sloane's voice calling, "Patricia!" My voice calling, "Patricia Drummond." Patricia's own voice calling, "Help me! Someone help me!" Over and over, echoing through the trees, layering on top of each other until it sounded like dozens of versions of us were out there in the darkness. All calling, all searching, all lost. Patricia pressed her hands over her ears. "Make it stop," she whispered. "Please make it stop." But we couldn't make it stop. We could only sit there, listening to our own voices calling to us from the forest, watching as shadows moved between the trees, shapes that might have been human but moved wrong, too fluid, too quick, too many joints in the wrong places. I kept my headlamp off, not wanting to see what was making those shadows. Sloane did the same. We sat in darkness broken only by the faint glow of my watch face, holding on to each other, trying to stay grounded in reality. This went on for hours. Our voices calling, the shapes circling. I counted the repetitions at first, 20, 50, 100. Lost count somewhere after that. The voices never got tired, never stopped for breath. They just kept calling, mechanical and tireless. None of them came into the clearing, I noticed, like there was an invisible boundary they couldn't cross. They circled at the tree line, never getting closer than about 20 feet from where we sat huddled against the boulder. As if the clearing itself was protecting us from whatever was out there, or keeping us contained. The thought made me shiver despite Sloane's warmth next to me. What if we weren't safe in the clearing? What if we were trapped there, like insects in a web, being kept fresh until something was ready to feed? I shook my head, trying to clear those thoughts. Exhaustion and fear were making me paranoid, seeing predators in every shadow, but the voices kept calling, and the shadows kept circling, and dawn felt impossibly far away. Finally, mercifully, the first gray light of dawn began to filter through the trees. It started so gradually I almost didn't notice, the darkness lessening by degrees, black becoming charcoal, becoming gray. And as the darkness receded, the voices faded. The shapes disappeared, melting back into the forest like mist under sunlight. The forest became just a forest again. Trees and ferns and moss. Normal. Safe. "Is it over?" Patricia asked, her voice hoarse from hours of silence and cold. "I don't know," Sloane said honestly. "But it's light now. We can try again." We stood up, stiff and cold from sitting all night. My legs had gone numb, pins and needles shooting through them as blood flow returned. I looked around the clearing one more time. The orange X's on the trees, the boulder in the center. It all looked so ordinary in daylight, almost peaceful, like nothing had happened. But I could still hear those voices in my head, my own voice calling from the darkness. "Let's go," I said, eager to leave this place behind. Same plan. Pick a direction. Keep walking. Don't turn back no matter what. This time we chose south, toward where the main trail should be. And this time, something was different. After about 10 minutes of walking, during which I counted every step, determined to know exactly how far we'd gone, we found one of Sloane's orange marks, a single X on a tree trunk, the paint still slightly wet. "That's mine," Sloane said, relief evident in her voice. "I remember marking that tree. We're on the right path." We followed the marks, finding them at regular intervals now, every 100 feet, just like Sloane had planned. The marks led us in a relatively straight line, and I started to recognize some of the terrain. That fallen log, that distinctive rock formation. We were on familiar ground again, and after 20 minutes we emerged onto the main trail, the real trail, wide and well-maintained, with official markers pointing clearly toward the trailhead. The markers were positioned correctly now, pointing the right direction, no longer trying to lead us astray. "Thank God," Patricia said, nearly sobbing with relief. We hurried down the trail, practically running despite our exhaustion. After everything we'd experienced, I half expected the trail to shift again, to lead us back to that clearing, but it didn't. The path stayed true, leading us steadily downward, toward safety and civilization and explanations that made sense. We passed the 4-mile marker, no pack on the log now, which I registered with dull surprise, and kept going. Someone must have already retrieved it, I thought. Other rangers must have come up the trail while we were lost, found the pack, taken it back down. The search must have continued without us. 2 hours later, we reached the trailhead. There were multiple ranger vehicles parked there, and a search team was gearing up to come looking for us. When they saw us emerge from the trees, there was a moment of stunned silence. Then everyone rushed over. "Where the hell have you been?" demanded Rodriguez, the senior ranger. "You've been missing for 14 hours. 14? I checked my watch. It showed 9:30 a.m. We'd left the station at 7 p.m. the night before. That was only 14 and a half hours, but it had felt so much longer. "We got lost," Sloane said, her voice flat. "Equipment malfunction. GPS and compasses weren't working right." It was an oversimplification, but what else could we say? That the forest had trapped us? That something had been circling us all night, mimicking our voices? They'd think we'd gone crazy. Patricia was taken to the hospital for evaluation. Sloane and I were debriefed, asked to write detailed reports about what happened. I stuck to the facts as much as possible. The disturbed trail markers, the GPS malfunction, the difficulty navigating back to the main trail. I left out the voices, the shadows, the impossible geometry of that clearing. But I could see in Sloane's eyes that she was thinking about it, about what had really happened out there. A week later, park maintenance was sent to investigate the trail markers. They found several that had been repositioned or damaged. Their report attributed it to vandalism, possibly teenagers. The section of trail where we'd gotten lost was temporarily closed for maintenance and rerouting. I went back 2 months later, after the trail had been reopened. I had to see that clearing again, to prove to myself it was real, but I couldn't find it. The clearing with the boulder, the trees with the orange marks, it was gone. I walked the same route we'd taken that night, or tried to. But there was no unmarked trail branching off from the main path, no markers pointing toward something that shouldn't exist. Either they'd removed everything during the closure, or it had never been there at all. I wanted to believe it was the former, that there had been some unofficial trail, some maintenance access path that we'd stumbled onto, that the strange experiences had been due to exhaustion, stress, darkness playing tricks on our senses. But I couldn't shake the memory of standing in that clearing, watching dawn break, seeing those orange X's on the trees. Dozens of them. Far more than Sloan should have had paint for, like we'd been marking trees for days instead of hours. And I remembered the voices. My voice calling to me from the forest. Sloan's voice. Perfect mimicry that no human could have produced. Sloan transferred to a different district a month after the incident. She said it was for a promotion, but I knew better. She couldn't stay here, couldn't keep working trails that might shift under her feet, forests that might trap her again. Patricia Drummond never went hiking again. She called me once, a few months later, to ask if I'd experienced anything strange on that trail. I told her no, that it had been a straightforward rescue. She knew I was lying, but she thanked me anyway. I keep having this dream, she told me. I'm back in that clearing, but I'm alone this time, and I realize I've always been there, that I never left, that everything since the rescue, going home, my normal life, that's the dream, and the clearing is real. I told her it was just stress, that what we experienced was disorienting, but it was over now. But after we hung up, I stood looking at the trail map on my office wall, and I wondered, what if that clearing was still out there? What if it appeared and disappeared, trapping people for a night or a week or longer? What if time worked differently there, so that what felt like hours was actually days or weeks? What if Patricia was right, and some part of us was still there, still trapped, still walking in circles trying to find our way out? I pulled that trail section on my map and stared at it. On paper, it was simple. 8 miles out and back, well marked, regularly maintained. Nothing dangerous, nothing unusual. But I circled it in red marker and wrote a note in my personal log. Avoid night searches on Enchanted Valley Trail. Equipment unreliable in that sector. It was the best I could do. I couldn't report what had really happened without sounding insane. Couldn't warn people about something I couldn't explain or prove. All I could do was remember, and make sure I never ended up in that clearing again. Because some part of me believes Patricia's dream. Believes that the clearing is still there, still waiting. And that those of us who found our way out were just lucky. That next time, we might not be. I think about this every time I plan a search route now. Every time I see a trail marker that seems slightly off. Every time I hear my own voice echo in the forest. The trails are supposed to be fixed, stable, predictable. They're marked by humans to guide other humans safely through the wilderness. But sometimes the wilderness doesn't want to be predicted. Sometimes it has its own geography, its own rules. And sometimes, if you're unlucky enough to find one of those places where the rules are different, the trail shifts under your feet. And all the markers in the world won't help you find your way home.